It's generally, again, near average for the time of year.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Patrick Christie's Tonight, weekdays from 9 p.m.
Ken, do you find the Union flag, the Union Jack, divisive?
In some situation, but as Simon quite clearly stated, and I agree with everything that he says in regards that there's situation when people use it for ulterior motive to cause fear, alarm and distress. We saw that with the far right when they came up to saying protecting the Churchill statues and things of that nature. But largely on the large whole, even I wave the St. George's flag on a sporting occasion. And I don't see anything wrong in raising the Union Jack or the St. George's flag so long as the intention is correct. And as he says, Mr. Brockhurst, he served for the country and he should have every right to be proud of what he's done and the way that he wants to display it.
All right, Simon, what do you make of this kind of, I would argue it as like student social media-based politics, where you get these pillocks from the Green Party or whatever saying, oh, it's divisive and I can't believe it. It will be legal in this country to do... Do those people need to get out more? I was on the streets of Stratford earlier on, an incredibly diverse place, speaking to a massive range of people right across different age demographics. I couldn't find a single sausage who said to me that they thought that this guy from the Green Party was right.
He obviously has absolutely no attention from anybody, and this is his way of finding attention. Both Ken and myself, we both agree that nobody should use any symbol of national identity to offend others deliberately, because that's just inflaming a situation. There's so much sensitivity around so many things today, and people do get offended by so much so quickly without any rhyme or reason.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Hello and welcome to GB News Saturday. I'm Dawn Neeson, and for the next 3 hours I'll be keeping you company on TV, online and on digital radio. Keep you up to date on all the stories that really matter to you. Coming up this hour, Richard Tice has announced the Reform Party will raise the 40p income tax threshold to £70,000 and called for reductions in stamp duty, inheritance tax and corporation tax. But will this be enough to get some seats in the Commons after the general election? And then the government pledges £250 million to help the war effort in Ukraine, as today marks the 2nd anniversary of Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine. But should we spend even more money on the war effort while we struggle at home? And could Prince Harry be deported from America after his admission to drug use in his memoir Spare? A US court is having their say on that one. Hey, but this show isn't about me, it's about you. Nothing without you and your views. So let me know your thoughts on all the stories we'll be discussing today. Email me on gbviews@gbnews.com or message me on our socials. We're at GB News. But let's have a look at those news headlines with the very lovely Theo Chikomba.
Good afternoon. It's 1 minute past 12. I'm Theo Chicomba in the GB newsroom. The UK has reaffirmed its commitment to Ukraine, promising £245 million to produce artillery shells as the country's war with Russia enters its third year. The package will boost critical stockpiles of ammunition as Royal Air Force completes a further delivery of advanced tank-busting missiles. The Defence Secretary says he's proud that since the invasion, the UK has trained 60,000 Ukrainian troops, adding that no one has done as much for Kyiv than the UK. Grant Shapps says that West will keep going for as long as it takes to fight Russian aggression.
This is a package which will help to provide some of the artillery that's required, particularly on the front line, where Russia has really boosted their production levels. So it's massively important now that we stop Putin. It's going to cost us more if he came further, not least, of course, being terrible for our Ukrainian friends, but it would also be disastrous for the rest of the West.
Shadow Defence Secretary John Healey says the war in Ukraine is a global fight.
I think first to recognise that this isn't just Putin fighting on the battlefield in Ukraine. This is a diplomatic, economic and industrial struggle against wider Russian aggression. And we've got to have a broader UK plan to help defend Ukraine and defeat Putin. So that does mean tightening sanctions, as you say, closing supply chain loopholes and looking to seize the Russian assets that have been stolen to reconstructing Ukraine. It also means ramping up our military support.
Junior doctors in England are walking out for the 10th time since March last year over a pay dispute. The British Medical Association has asked for a 35% pay rise, which the government has described as unreasonable. More than 1.3 million appointments and operations have already been cancelled or rescheduled since industrial action began. The Health Secretary, Victoria Atkins, is calling for the strikes to end, saying she wants to see doctors treating patients, not on picket lines.
I want for this to be resolved. I've come to these negotiations with nothing but good intentions and a genuine desire to find a reasonable solution for junior doctors, but also importantly for patients and the public and the taxpayer. So I still want to try and achieve that, but I can only do that if the Junior Doctors Committee plays their part. Walking out of negotiations in November was not reasonable. They know that I want to go further in addition to the up to 10.3% that they have already received into their bank accounts.
The Defence Secretary has defended Tory MP Lee Anderson, who's under fire for comments he made about protests in London. Labour is calling for the whip to be removed from the former deputy chair after he said the Mayor Sadiq Khan had given the capital away to Islamists. Grant Shapps says his comments were born out of frustration following months of demonstrations. Shadow Paymaster General Jonathan Ashworth is also demanding that the whip be removed from Liz Truss for using a talk in the US to claim Conservatives in the UK are now operating in a hostile environment. A World War II bomb found in Plymouth has been detonated at sea. The 500-kilogram device was found in a garden in the Keyham area and lifted onto a military vehicle. It's forced thousands of residents to be evacuated from their homes. The Ministry of Defence says the operation to remove it safely has led to one of the largest peacetime evacuations since the Second World War. Thousands of cards of support have been sent to King Charles following his cancer diagnosis. The monarch laughed as he read one of them, which had a disgruntled dog on the front saying, "At least you don't have to wear a cone." Around 7,000 cards were sent from around the world, offering their good wishes, with one child writing, "Never give up, be brave, don't push your limits." Others shared their own experiences of cancer, urging him to stay positive. A lunar lander dubbed as Odysseus, which became the first ever commercial spacecraft to touch down on the moon, is said to be stable. The craft, about the size of a London Rent phone box, landed in the moon's South Pole region on Thursday night. The company behind the mission says the lander may have tipped on its side, but it's alive and well and in communication with operators. It's the first US lander to successfully reach the moon in more than 50 years. For the latest stories, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews/alerts. Now it's back to GB News Saturday.
Thank you very much, Theo. Right, let's get straight into today's story, shall we? Now, of course, we're in an election year. You may have noticed, I think it's been mentioned a couple of times. So every party will be out vying for your support in the general election. This morning was the Reform UK rally in Doncaster, with Richard Tice announcing they would raise the 40p income tax threshold to £70,000, including reductions in stamp duty, inheritance tax and corporation tax. Now, we'll be speaking to Richard Tice very shortly, but joining me now, I have a wonderful panel to talk about this, is broadcaster and legend, I think it's fair to say, Mike Parry, and former Labour advisor and equally legendary Scarlett Maguire. Thank you both very much. Very, very sensible people who can have a nice, friendly, cuddly debate. Now, we have heard pretty much what Richard Tice has said this morning. A lot of it was in the Telegraph this morning. Scarlett's got that look on her face already. She's just itching to get stuck in on this one. Now, the Reform Party, they are promising an awful lot. Now, it's an election year, Scarlett. We hear so many promises from so many political parties. A lot of detail about how they're actually going to do these things is left out, but what did you make about what you've heard from Richard Tice this morning?
I want to know how they're going to pay for it. I mean, that's always the problem with tax cuts. Is it's really nice saying to people you don't have to pay as much, but what are they going to cut from public spending? And I'm sure Richard will say, we'll make everything more efficient. But that's what every Secretary of State has said for as long as I can remember. I do not remember.
Which is not that long a time. I mean, let's be honest.
Of course, it's only a few decades. But I mean, I just got tired of secretaries, and particularly health secretaries, saying, what we're going to do, we don't need more money. What we need is better efficiency. And you go on and on and on, and no waste. So what I want to know from Richard is if you're cutting all these things for us, what are you going to cut in the public spending? Because actually one of the problems at the moment is that the public rein is just not good enough. I mean, we know that the health service is having terrible problems. We know that schools are having terrible problems. People hate talking about local government, but actually, if you're talking potholes, if you're talking no use services, I mean, that is local government.
It was potholes was one of the things that won one of the recent by-elections, wasn't it? But I mean, potholes weren't mentioned this morning. But we heard about income tax, raising the threshold, stamp duty, increasing property price, inheritance tax, abolish corporation tax cut, VAT, scrap the tourist tax, private education and healthcare, reversal on whatever anyone else is saying, migration, freeze on non-essential migration, net zero, scrapped, ECHR left, defence spending raised, HS2 scrapped, and free speech encouraged, basically. Now, that's a lot of good stuff. It sounds like it's ticking all the right boxes, Mike, but has Scarlett said the devil is in the detail, and I'm not entirely sure where the money's coming from?
No, absolutely. Scarlett's absolutely right. Any politician who's not in power or anywhere near to power can make all sorts of promises. What I would say is I love the draft of this. I think it's fantastic. It rings all the right bells for me. Cutting taxes, because I believe that if you cut taxes, you stimulate the economy, you get more revenues. There's a thing called the Laffer curve, and the Laffer curve is the American economist who pointed out that if taxes go too high, then the takings drop down because people can't afford the services and all that. Now, we've got 9 million people inactive in this country, right? 9 million people who aren't even paying tax. And one of the, for various reasons, they might be ill or they're just out of work. One of the reasons so many people are economically inactive is because it doesn't pay to work in this country. Taxes are simply too high. They're at the highest we know for 70 years. It's a disincentive to work. And the way you would pay for these would be the same way that Nigel Lawson revolutionised tax payments. When he got in, taxes were at a highest peak of 80p for the top earners. He got that down to 40p. And he did that through years of diligent and prudent management of the economy, slashing wasteful spending, and there's loads of room in the economy in this country to slash wasteful spending. The welfare budget alone in this country is £265 billion. Now, if you're not telling me there's room there to make cuts, it's proved as well. George Osborne, who I thought was a hopeless Chancellor, it's proved that when you put up taxes, the take goes down. And that was with stamp duty.
Yes,
he suddenly started launching huge stamp duty rises on everybody, including me, who's a property investor. And lo and behold, in the next financial year, he took £2 billion less. So I love the principle of low taxes. I'm a low tax freak. I believe in trickle-down economics. If you give people more money of their own to keep in their own pocket, they are more efficient at spending it than wasteful politicians.
Right, OK, talking of wasteful politicians, let's go and talk to a genuine politician, the one that actually came out with what we have been talking about now, and that is Richard Tice himself. Joining me now is GB News political correspondent Catherine Forster, who is, I believe, with Richard Tice. Catherine, good afternoon.
Yes, good afternoon from Doncaster Racecourse, where Reform are having their biggest ever conference. I've got a 30-page working draft here of their policies, and I'm joined now by their leader, Richard Tice. Richard, thank you for talking to us today.
Great pleasure.
Can I just say, you said people laughed at you in the beginning. They're not laughing now. You're 13% in the polls. What it is that you're doing that's so appealing to people? And do you think you can win in Rochdale next week?
So what we're doing is providing common sense policies that actually work for ordinary people up and down the country. This contract is not a manifesto, it's a contract. We've done it in draft, it's very businesslike. It sets out over £100 billion worth of savings from waste and unnecessary, like scrapping net zero, not paying bank interest on the QE reserves that we shouldn't be doing, that's voluntarily enriching the city, saving £5 in 100 on wasteful government spending, huge sums, and then how we invest it in personal tax cuts, lifting income tax starting point to £20,000, which is vital. It frees up 7 million people, huge benefits for small businesses, abolishing IR35, reducing corporation tax, lifting the VAT threshold. This is what's going to get the country growing again, as opposed to we're sinking at the moment. Also, we're announcing a major different set of policies with regard to healthcare. Still free at the point of delivery, being able to invest an extra £17 billion a year in health. But we're not giving it to the bungling bureaucrats. No. And we're going to get to zero waiting lists. We could do it within 2 years. And what we've got to do, we've got to buy many more operations from the independent sector, the charity, private healthcare sector. We've got to encourage those that can pay more to pay more with a tax incentive. But the great thing is that we will still, healthcare will always be free at the point of delivery. But we have to accept the outcomes are amongst the worst in Europe. We're the only party with the courage to say we can get to 2 years, we can get to zero waiting lists in 2 years. We can invest 17 billion more in healthcare, but not to the bungling NHS bureaucrats. And then major investment in defence, in a whole new department for veterans, and so on. So it's a great document. It's on our website. I'd urge people to read it.
You're pledging massive tax cuts, no tax for the first 20,000, raise the high tax threshold to 70,000, cut inheritance tax, etc. It all sounds massively expensive. We've got a national debt of 2.6 trillion. How on earth are you going to pay for this stuff?
That's what's all set out in the document, the savings. So if we scrap net zero, for example, that will save £30 billion at least, and I've been cautious about that number, every single year. That's £600 per person. If you don't pay the base rate bank interest on the QE reserves, that's another £35 billion of saving. These are huge sums. That's how you pay for it. But the government won't do this. I've talked about this before. No one's disagreed with me on this. Economists agree with me. Think tanks agree with me. We shouldn't be paying this huge sum. That's the equivalent of £700 per person just on the QE reserves at bank interest alone. And the waste in government spending is vast. I'm saying to every spending manager, just like we are at home, you've got to save £5 in 100. If not, you're fired. I know it sounds tough. The country is in crisis. We are going bankrupt unless we change course. We can change course. And the thing is, you talk about the national debt. The way to do that, the way to overcome that, you've got to grow the economy. We're sinking at the moment under sinking Sunak. Starmer's got no plan to grow the economy. This is a serious plan to grow the economy. And yes, deliberately I've issued it as a draft. Many people will like it. Some people say you forgot this and this, and our enemies will criticise that number and this number. The great thing is they're talking about us, and we're engaging in a proper debate about how to reorganise and run the country so we can get growing again.
You talk about the prospect of Starmageddon, as you call it, but you must know you're going to take a lot more votes from the Conservatives than you are from Labour. So you are a party on the right, but ultimately, aren't you going to just be helping the left in the next election?
The truth is, we're the only party on the right now. The Socialists have become con-socialists. They're the party of the left. They're no difference to the Labour Party, and the Tories have had their chance. We gave them that chance in December 19. They've blown it. They've messed up. Frankly, they should stand aside, let me and Reform UK take on Keir Starmer, and I'm absolutely confident after an election period we'd beat him hands down. That's the way, literally, to save Britain. This conference is saying we're ready to save Britain whenever the election is, whether it's in May, June or the autumn.
Are you still planning to stand in every seat? Because the reality is, isn't it, that because of the voting system we have, even if you get millions of votes, as UKIP did in 2015, you're unlikely to get many or hardly any seats.
Which is one of the reasons why we need a fairer electoral system called proportional representation that actually I think if there was a referendum many people would want. But yes, we're standing in every single seat, 630 seats across England, Scotland, Wales. That's how democracy works. We've got a very different set of policies in order to save Britain, and everybody deserves the chance to vote on that. That's absolutely essential. And we're going up in the polls as Sunak and the toxic Tories are sinking in the polls, and this is the reason why. We've got the right policies. They haven't, and it's a disaster. We're in recession at the moment, and per head, we've had the longest period of recession, 7 quarters, I think since records began. I mean, this is a disaster. We've got to change course urgently.
Do you think you can win in Rochdale next week? George Galloway is currently the favourite, but can Simon Danczuk get there and get that seat for you?
Well, I was there yesterday with Simon. We're getting a fantastic reception. We're working incredibly hard. Look, all these things are difficult, but I think that actually what the good constituents of Rochdale want, I think what they want is they want the candidate to focus on Rochdale, not Gaza that George Galloway is focusing on. So look, that's the point of democracy. We'll put our best case forward, and Simon will do, I'm very sure, we'll get our best result ever. He's a brilliant candidate, and let's wait and see. Not many days to go.
And finally, just a quick comment, if I may, on Lee Anderson. He's got into a lot of hot water. What's your view on what he said, and would you like him to come over to the Reform Party?
Look, I think that's a matter for Lee. I'm not going to comment on what he said. Lee's a good man. His heart's in the right place. But I think the reality is that the party's left him, basically, and I think there are a number of Conservatives who actually, frankly, they agree with our policies. We're not doing a deal with the Tories, but they've all got my telephone number when they realise that actually the Conservative Party, that has essentially the Tory party, it's a party of social democrats and socialists. It no longer stands for the philosophy of conservatism that we have adopted.
Richard Tice, thank you so much for talking to us today. So there you have it. Richard Tice believes that the Conservative Party is no longer conservative. Reform think they are offering something different to people fed up with the Conservatives who don't think that Labour is the answer either. They've certainly got a spring in their step here. I'll be bringing you more throughout the afternoon.
Catherine, thank you very much. That's Catherine Forster there, our political correspondent in Doncaster with Richard Tice. A quick comment from our panel now, coming to you first. Scarlett, we heard a lot there from Mr Tice. What are you taking away from that?
Well, I should be really grateful to him because he's going to absolutely ensure a Labour victory. I mean, that's what this is all about, is he's fighting the Tories. Let's let them do it, and Labour can actually put out a proper manifesto.
Richard did also say at one point he was targeting Labour as much as he was targeting the Tories. But, Mike, what do you make of that one?
one expression there, common sense, and I totally agree with him. If you look at the policies, it is common sense to give people back more of their money, to stop reckless spending, to try and stimulate the economy. It is common sense, and the problem with politicians is they don't have enough common sense. I got an A level in economics, but I know more about how to run the economy than politicians.
Would you vote for him?
No, because he's not going to win.
Scarlett? Stupid question of the day, Dawn, but,
Yeah,
you know, you've got to be
absolutely.
fair here.
No, I mean, as Mike says, he's not going to win, but he is going to ensure that, that a lot of Tories lose their seat. And I thought what he said about Lee Anderson, I mean, let's not kid each other. If Lee Anderson had used the word Jew instead of Islam, he'd be out like a shot.
Okay,
I think he might push the Tories to better tax policies. I think that's part of his plan, and I think that's what he's trying to do.
Which will be benefit for everyone. We'll be talking more about Lee Anderson later on in the show, so stay tuned for that one. Now, seeing as we have mentioned the Rochdale by-election, here is the full list of candidates for you. Azhar Ali, Labour; Mark Coleman, Independent; Simon Danczuk, Reform UK; Ian Donaldson, Liberal Democrat; and Paul Ellison, Conservative; and George Galloway, Workers' Party of Britain; Michael Howarth, Independent; William Howarth, Independent; Guy Otten, Green Party; Ravin Roden, Subudna, Official Monster Raving Looney Party; David Tully, Independent. And that's the full list. Now, you are watching and listening to GB News Saturday with me, Dawn Leeson, and loads more coming up on today's show. The government pledges £250 million to help the war effort in Ukraine, as today marks the second anniversary of Russia's illegal invasion of that country. All of that and much more to come. You're with GB News, Britain's news channel. See you soon.
(2024), a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall? Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
Martin Daubney, weekdays from 3 p.m.
Welcome to the show. Superb stuff, great footage. So you're right in the thick of it there. What's the mood on the ground?
Well, I've left there now. I've actually now come to that EU Council summit that I was talking about. It's still pretty chaotic. The entire city of Brussels has been completely clogged with these tractors, sort of three abreast in most of the roads across the city. The people of Brussels aren't particularly happy. I mean, this is sort of reminiscent for some people of the Just Stop Oil protests, you know, people gluing themselves. People are unable to get to hospital appointments, and there's a lot of upset about the destruction that's happening on the streets of Brussels today. But on the other side, there's also the protests, which the farmers are saying that EU green laws simply are not able to fit with what they need to do to keep their businesses going. And just before the protests happened, we saw the European Commission actually make some concessions to the farmers' protests. And this is on the demands that were put on them to set aside somewhere in the region of 5% of their land for regrowing for biodiversity. A lot of the farmers have said that's not possible, and the European Commission has said that they can delay that coming in. So they have won a small concession with these protests.
And Jack, there's a feeling as well, a huge dissatisfaction that the European Union has managed to find 50 billion euros in aid to send to Ukraine, and yet farmers in particular are on the receiving end of net zero targets, taxation on diesel, and endless red tape. So many farmers, Jack, saying they're measuring ditches to see if they have to drain them or not. There are minimum requirements on the width of battery hen enclosures. Endless red tape, as Jeremy Clarkson pointed out in Clarkson's farm in Britain. They've simply had enough, and they're shouting, Ursula von der Leyen, we are here.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to GB News Saturday with me, Dawn Neeson, on your TV, online and on digital radio. Now, the government pledges £250 million to help the war effort in Ukraine, as today it marks the second anniversary of Russia's illegal invasion of that country, which prompted thousands of men and women to enlist to defend their homeland. In that time, the UK has offered its support, providing not just billions of pounds worth of weaponry, but also vital military training. Our reporter Ray Addison joined some Ukrainian soldiers training on British soil.
Smoke, rubble and destroyed buildings. Since Russia's invasion, Ukrainian soldiers have become used to scenes like this. But these recruits are a long way from their homeland. Here at a secret training camp in the West Country, Zelensky's last line of defence is being taught the art of urban warfare. Until 3 weeks ago, Volodymyr was a taxi driver in western Ukraine. He told me he gave that life up when he realised the military was desperately in need of more support. He's now urging everyone to enlist and fight. Dubbed Operation Interflex, the training is designed to give those with little to no military experience the skills they need to be effective in frontline combat.
There are friendly forces in the area.
As they move through battle scenarios, drill sergeants urge them to attack the crack, clearing, holding and defending buildings. Essential skills if they ever hope to rid their country of Russian invaders. Lieutenant Colonel Davidson is Interflex's deputy commander. He says the course has changed as the fighting evolves.
So we're now seeing UAV and drone presence, a persistence presence. We're also seeing greater minefield depth and IEDs being employed in those trenches. So it's areas like that that we've concentrated on, and the Ukrainians are bringing forward those lessons into our training.
Remember the door jogs? I know the door jogs are a bit tight.
It's a big job, involving hundreds of British military personnel, translators and 11 other partner nations, including Canada and Australia. Vladislav has served in Ukraine's National Guard since 2013. He says when he joined, his training focused on defending the country. But now in the UK, he's learning how to attack. There are 6 training camps like this across the UK, and 34,000 soldiers have passed through their doors. But at this stage in the war, with Ukraine being forced to concede ground to Russia, the skills the soldiers are learning have never been needed more. The Ministry of Defence says that after the US, the UK is the second largest military to donate to Ukraine, providing more than £4.6 billion since the war began, and was the first country to donate Western main battle tanks. It's hoped that these munitions, handled by soldiers with British military training, will one day stop the Russian invasion. Ray Addison, GB News.
Thank you very much, Ray. Joining me now is former head of counter-terrorism at the MOD, Major General Chip Chapman. Chip, good to see you. Thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. Obviously marking a day 2 years ago that saw the illegal invasion of Ukraine. What do you make of where we are at the moment? Is Russia actually winning this war?
Well, Advika fell on the 18th of February after a 5-month battle. That was another mother of all battles, another defeat after Bakhmut last May. But that's the point. Mother of all battles is a tactical level event. It is not an operational level event. And Donetsk, which both Bakhmut and Advika are in, is 4.4% of the Ukrainian territory. So in terms of Russia taking over the geography totally of Ukraine, that is not going to happen. What you can say at the moment probably is that Ukraine is losing slowly in the same way that it was in June 22, for example. And then the battlefield was equalized by the introduction of new capabilities at the time. The HIMARS, that's the rocket systems from the Americans, precision strike and more artillery. Of course, the battlefield can be equalized again quite quickly if, for example, the unlocking of the $60 billion aid package from America is enabled. But at the moment, there is an eroding stalemate that is in favour of Russia, but I don't think it's terminal at the moment.
Chip, Britain, Grant Shapps indeed has said we'll invest £250 million in producing artillery shells for the Ukrainian army. David Lammy, Shadow Foreign Secretary, has also pledged money to continue the fight. Can Ukraine survive without our support? And do you think the appetite for people in this country is still as strong as it was? Or do you think we're thinking charity should start beginning at home now?
Well, I think there's three cases to support Ukraine. The first one is the security case, that it's actually in our interest geopolitically and geostrategically to support them. You know, Russia is a revanchist country, which is why Finland and Sweden want to join NATO. The second one is the moral case. Russia actually invaded Ukraine. And the third one is the economic case. It's actually very, very cheap if you take the first thing, that the security support is necessary. So, for example, it's 0.02% of GDP. In a benchmark term, that is 1/100th% of the annual benefits bill of the UK, and that is a lot cheaper than having to fight Russia down the road. And you've had a lot of people say that we're in a pre-war period at the moment. I don't take that view. I reverse that. And my framing bias, if there is one, is that we're in a long peace, and the best way to enable that long peace is to ensure that the outcome of this war is in favour of Ukraine.
So Russia won't stop unless we stop them, basically?
I think that's true in terms of their worldview, which is to regain lost territory and spheres of influence. That includes a thing called Ruski Mir, which is the Russian-speaking world. So if they were to succeed in Ukraine and dismember Ukraine, then I think that certainly the Baltic states, where there are Russian-speaking people, would potentially be a grand strategic objective in future years, not necessarily next year or the year after, but that's not the time frame that the Russian nationalists thinking.
OK, that is Chip Chapman, former head of counter-terrorism there. Thank you very much for joining us today on an anniversary, not a happy one, of the 2 years since Russia illegally invaded the Ukraine. You're with me, Dawn Neeson, on GB News Saturday. Lots more coming up on today's show. But first, let's get the news headlines with Theo Chikomba.
It's 33 minutes past 12. I'm Theo Chikomba in the GB newsroom. The UK has reaffirmed its commitment to Ukraine, promising £245 million to produce artillery shells as the country's war with Russia enters its third year. The package will boost critical stockpiles of ammunition as the Royal Air Force completes a further delivery of advanced tank-busting missiles. The Defence Secretary, Grant Shapps, says he's proud that since the invasion, the UK has trained 60,000 Ukrainian troops, adding that no one has done as much for Kyiv than the UK. Junior doctors in England are walking out for the 10th time since March last year over a pay dispute. The British Medical Association has asked for a 35% pay rise, which the government has described as unreasonable. More than 1.3 million appointments and operations have already been cancelled or rescheduled since the industrial action began. The Defence Secretary has defended Tory MP Lee Anderson, who's under fire for comments he made about protests in London. Labour is calling for the whip to be removed from the former deputy chair after he said the Mayor, Sadiq Khan, had given the capital away to Islamists. Grant Shapps says it was born out of frustration following months of demonstrations. Shadow Paymaster General Jonathan Ashworth is also demanding the whip be removed from Liz Truss for using the talk in the US to claim Conservatives in the UK are now operating in a hostile environment. Thousands of cards of support have been sent to King Charles following his cancer diagnosis. The monarch laughed as he read one of them, which had a disgruntled dog on the front saying, "At least you don't have to wear a cone." Around 7,000 cards were sent from around the world, offering their good wishes, with one child writing, "Never give up, be brave, don't push your limits." For the latest stories, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews/alerts. Now it's back to GB News Saturday.
Thank you, Theo. I love that you don't have to wear a cone. That's so sweet, isn't it? Any case, remember you can get in touch about all the topics we've been discussing today by emailing me on gbviews@gbnews.com or message me on our socials @gbnews. Really simple. Now, lots more coming up on today's show. Why on earth has Victoria and Albert Museum looking to recruit a Taylor Swift superfan as an official advisor? I'm not applying, don't worry. All of that and much more to come. I'm Dawn Neeson and you're with GB News, Britain's news channel. Go and get a nice cuppa, but don't go too far.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Britain's Newsroom, weekday mornings from 9:30.
Are you across this microaggression story?
I'm across microaggressions. I'm also across XL bullies.
You would not last 5 minutes.
Oh, for God's
So
sake,
basi-
civil servants, give me strength.
So civil servants have been taught not to roll their eyes. Something you do very well. We both do it quite a lot, actually.
Because it's seen as an act of microaggression. This, by the way, this costs the taxpayer, this training, £160,000. What the hell is going on in our woke civil service? Who cares if someone rolls their eyes in exasperation?
What the hell is going on in our civil service, full stop, if the way that civil servants are communicating with each other is rolling their eyes and looking at their phones? I mean, is the government being run by people who are essentially acting to each other like stroppy teenagers?
But I'm all right with people, because, you see, I would be in defence of eye rolling.
So me too, I couldn't care less.
But do you know why? Because I want people to give me their genuine reaction, as long as it's not deeply offensive. But I want to know how people feel. And what they're being told here, civil servants are being taught, and of course this is an area of employment law, because people are taking cases against their bosses who roll their eyes at them. They're saying they're being encouraged to say nothing and nod their heads to promote transparency and inclusion. Don't show what you really think, just nod your head.
But I think that comes with then saying what you really think, and this is the key problem, and what these courses are trying to establish. And I looked into some of them when I was researching this, and it's not saying hide what you're feeling. It's saying, rather than huffing and puffing and rolling your eyes, if you've got a disagreement with someone, say I've got a disagreement with someone. Because otherwise, you can't have an effective workplace if people are sort of just passively, aggressively huffing at each other.
Why do these civil servants need to be taught this? Why do people need to be taught this? This is just normal discourse in a normal working day. You don't need a seminar on it.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel. 2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall? Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
Welcome back to GB News Saturday with me, Dawn Neeson, on your TV, online and on digital radio. Now, I hope you've got that nice cuppa ready. I've got mine here, because you might need it. The Victoria and Albert Museum is looking to recruit a Taylor Swift superfan advisor. No, me neither. The museum is looking for insights into the culture behind handmade signs, friendship bracelets and memorabilia associated with the singer ahead of their European leg of her Eras tour. I have no idea what I'm talking about. I'm really not a fan. But I do know someone that is an expert on this, and that's a showbiz reporter, Stephanie Tecci.
Hi,
Supremo, hello. Now, This is not a job for me, obviously.
No.
Tell us more about it.
Swifties, you know, Taylor is just an icon, in a sense, when you think about the music industry. The reason why I think the V&A... Oh, she's fabulous, but the reason why I think the V&A is doing this, because I have a feeling they are going to be doing a Taylor Swift exhibition in the future. So they've been looking for 5 experts in different fields, not just Taylor. We've also have Crocs footwear, emojis and drags. What is the best way to understand Taylor Swift and her effect on people? Through her fans. Her fan base, you know, Beyonce's got a fan base, they call them the Beehives. And these particular fans, when they go to the concerts, they're swapping posters, they're swapping friendship bracelets. So the V&A really wants to get an insight to the fans and why these memorabilia are so precious, because one day you're going to go into the V&A museum and you're going to be seeing these on display. The person's not going to get paid that much for it. It's not actually a paid job. So the person might get travel covered, and also they'll get a V&A membership, which I don't know how appealing this is actually going to be to Swifties. They probably want to meet Taylor and probably get some concert tickets in the future. No, that is not mentioned. But again, it's going to be interesting to see what the V&A does with this insight.
And what's the Crocs thing? I mean, I'm sorry, if you love your Crocs out there, I get it, each to their own.
Yeah.
But they are the most hideous footwear ever.
Well, the director of the V&A, Tristan Hunt, he is saying that he wants the V&A to be diverse with their collection. So they've already got experts in Pokemon cards and Lego. So now they're also looking for experts in emojis, drags and Crocs footwear. You know, it all sounds a bit weird, Dawn, but I think these are the kind of things that culture has gone a bit crazy for over the last few years. And in 10, 20 years from now, these are the trends that we'll be looking at and thinking, actually, these were quite big things at the time, or quirky things at the time. And also, we can say maybe the V&A are running out of ideas, so they need to do a bit more just to, you know, boost the creativity.
So if you're a 6'6" drag queen who wears Crocs and is a Swiftie, you're a shoe-in. You can do all of those jobs in one shoe-in.
That was all three. But yeah, so basically they're looking for these 5 experts, and you know, it's generated a lot of interest because people are thinking, you know what, it's hard times, but clearly being a creative or being an expert in these kind of fields will pay.
OK, right, can we talk about another icon, another female icon back in the day? Mel B and the Spice Girls.
Yes.
What's this about?
Today she's in the front of the Sun today. She went through a very abusive marriage with a film producer called Stephen Belafonte. She had to leave. He literally fled from LA back to the UK, and she said when she came back to the UK, she was almost broke. The headline that the Sun has gone with, they said that she was forced to shop in Lidl. I'm sorry, most of us have shopped at Lidl. Dawn.
Literally there?
Yeah, Dawn, most of us have shopped at Lidl at some point, but obviously for a Spice Girl who probably is a millionaire, she sees that as a fall from grace. But I think she just wanted to reiterate the hard time she was going through. Whether most people can relate to that, I don't know. But it brings this whole thing, Dawn, about celebrities. People tend to think they're always rolling in the riches, but, you know, go through a horrible divorce, get your contract dropped from a lucrative brand, you can face hard times. You know, with the Spice Girls, obviously they had their heyday in the 90s, but if you're no longer making those music hits, she's been a judge of different reality TV shows, but that can only pay so much when you've got a big mansion or you've got an abusive ex-husband who's trying to milk you for everything you've got.
She did go through it,
didn't she? So, you know, like or lump her, she is talking about her experiences. And to be honest, Dawn, I think a lot of celebrities are going to be coming out through the hard times.
You know what, it's like King Charles, the whole cancer thing, is it? The more you talk about these issues, the more people think, I got this problem, I need help. So fair play to her there.
And it goes to show they're not indestructible. They're human beings like me and you, so they're going to go through it.
Stephanie, thank you so much.
Lots of love, Dawn.
Utter joy. Right. She's not wearing Crocs, by the way.
I'm not yet.
As Stephanie said, she's showbiz supremo, I think we call her. Thank you. Now, you're with me, Dawn Neeson, on GB News Saturday, and there's loads more coming up on today's show. Could Prince Harry, yes, him again, be deported from America after his admission to drug use in his memoir, Spare? A US court is having their say on that one. All of that and much more to come. You're with GB News, Britain's news channel. Thank you so much. Brilliant. Thank you.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
The Camilla Tominey Show. Sunday mornings from 9:30.
We had Grant Shapps on last week. He was talking about how defence spending is now creeping up to 2.25% of GDP. Ben Wallace's predecessor suggested it should be 3%. We hear that we've got the smallest army, I think, since the Napoleonic Wars. Numbers are down. There's a question as to whether we can staff frigates in the Red Sea. Why haven't we sent aircraft carriers? What's your impression of the situation?
Well, I don't think it matters how much you spend, it's how effectively you spend it. And we spend it very ineffectively. We have lots of scandals about defence spending. And I think partly because of the monopoly position of some of our defence suppliers, we don't get good value and we don't get reliability. This latest story in the Telegraph is that HMS Diamond, which is our ship, which is out there defending the Red Sea, doesn't have the capability of firing a missile from the ship to the land, so it can't participate in the attacks on the Houthis. So in order that we can participate in the attacks, we're flying RAF aircraft from Cyprus, which is a very long way away. When I was Defence Secretary, I ordered cruise missiles for our nuclear-powered, but not nuclear-armed submarines. And I think we have 6 or possibly 7 of those. But last autumn, it was reported that 5 of those were out of commission, were not available. We have about 21 aggressive surface ships. So we've got 2 aircraft carriers, then we've got frigates, and we've got destroyers. But at any one time, you can count on about half of those not being available because they're under refit or whatever. So we have a minimal surface fleet now. And for whatever reason, it doesn't seem that we're able to deploy a submarine to the area that can fire cruise missiles. Our 2 aircraft carriers, built at enormous expense, are sitting in Portsmouth.
Which seems to most people ludicrous,
well,
at least with what's going on.
It doesn't seem ludicrous to me.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens with our team of dedicated journalists across the UK. We're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. We've been comparing Crocs in the break. Actually, we haven't. No, we haven't. We don't wear Crocs. Welcome back to GB News Saturday with me, Dawn Neeson, on your TV, online and on digital radio. Now, lots of you have been getting in touch with your emails, which is what we love. It's all about you. Get in touch on the screen there, gbviews@gbnews.com. About you. Right, OK, let's see what you've been saying. Actually, glasses on. I look more intelligent. Actually, I need them. I'm blind as a bat. Wendy said, this is all about reform and Richard Tice. We had an interview with him earlier on. Wendy says, always voted Tory, but like Richard Tice and the clear direction of the Reform Party. Interesting one. Gary says, a lot of love in the room here. Gary, Richard Tice has a lot of charisma. The Reform Party just needs more media exposure to the people to win voters over. Well, we try to be fair on GB News. We try to give everyone a say in this one. Barbara says, interesting point, actually, Barbara. Reform wouldn't be able to run the country yet, mainly because of lack of experience, but they have potential. And meanwhile, Alan, good afternoon, Alan. Good afternoon, all of you, actually. Alan says, I would like to know what reform policy is on the income tax threshold. I'm paying income tax on my state pension, which is my only income. Well, they are. They have a policy on income tax, and if you go onto our website, it's all on there as well. So please do have a look. Thank you very much. He said, keep those messages coming in. Now, a lawyer for Biden administration has told a US court that Prince Harry's memoir, Spare, is proof that he took drugs. It's not proof that he took drugs. So it is not proof that he took drugs, because why would you write anything accurate about yourself in your memoir? not proof that he took drugs. The Duke of Sussex visa was at the centre of a court case today as a Conservative think tank wants Harry's US immigration files to be made public. Now, in his memoir, Spare, the Prince admitted to formally taking marijuana, cocaine and psychedelic mushrooms, all of which could be used as grounds to deny a US visa application, which could threaten Harry's immigration status. Now, joining me is a former royal correspondent Charles Ray to explain what exactly is going on here. Charles, thank you very much for joining us. Lovely to see you. Now, so Harry is a wannabe American national, we've potentially heard, haven't we? So what's going on with this court case?
Well, it seems to me to be a bit strange, where he clearly has written in this book that he's taken not just the odd drug, spliff or whatever, but he's taken cocaine, he's taken marijuana, he's had magic mushrooms, he's had other psychedelic drugs. Yet the Biden administration do not believe that this is proof that he has taken drugs because he wrote about it in this book, Spare. Now, he's been granted a visa in the court. This was a case taken by a conservative think tank in America because they wanted these records released. Because America is supposed to be pretty red hot on allowing people into the country if they have any criminal actions against them, which Harry doesn't, or if they have an admission that they take some sort of drugs, because there is a question on the visa application form to go to America. Have you taken drugs? Any type of drugs, obviously not medicinal drugs, but we're talking about hard drugs. And he's clearly, well, we believe he's said no to that question. And that's the way the situation is. Now, this raises the question now. The Conservative think tank is now going to have a look and see what else it can do with a view to another court case, which could lead to calls for Harry's deportation. Now, I hope that that does not happen, Dawn, because I do not want this whinger back here in this country at all. He stays in America, leave him there. I don't want him back here in any shape or form.
Oh, Charlie, I wish you'd sit on the fence a bit more on this one, mate. So basically, we have got Harry's lawyer saying that the book Harry wrote about his life is not necessarily true.
Well, that's what he seems to be suggesting. But we do know that a large portion of the drug taking is true because it's quite well documented here in this country. Let's not forget that Harry was actually sent to a drug rehabilitation centre to look at the perils of taking drugs. Now, that came out as it was done after he had taken the drugs, but in actual fact, it was done beforehand. So we are well aware in this country that Harry's had a few problems with a few dodgy substances. It's on the record.
So, as well as her late Queen Elizabeth, the late Queen Elizabeth saying that recollections may vary, Harry's own lawyer is saying recollections may vary.
Well, of course he is, because he's acting for his client. I mean, does that mean that what Harry was doing was a bit of fiction just to pump it all up in Spare? I mean, hard to believe he could possibly do that and slag off his country, slag off his family and everything else. Could he be lying about the drugs? I don't think he is lying about the drugs. I think that's probably one of the true things that is actually in the book.
Actually, Charles, we have... Oh, the perfect timing, lovely. Well done. That's Charles Ray, royal broadcaster and correspondent there. Thank you very much, Charles. Right now, you're with me, Dawn Neeson, on GB News Saturday. Loads more coming up on today's show. Rishi Sunak has torn into Welsh Labour for its implementation of 20-mile-an-hour zone, saying they're holding Wales back. Is he right, though? But let's check out the weather, shall we? Here's Greg.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Greg Dewhurst and welcome to your latest GB News weather. We've got showers around, but they're slowly fading away. We'll see some mist and fog patches before further wet and windy weather spreads in for Sunday and into Monday, and that's courtesy of this area of low pressure. Met Office warnings for the heavy rain falling on already saturated ground. We could see some flooding issues over the next few days. Showers fading away this evening time, lots of clear skies developing. That will allow temperatures to fall away, close to if not below freezing over overnight, so some frost in places, some icy stretches from recent showers, and also some mist and fog patches. Some wet and windy weather starting to move into parts of Cornwall by the end of the night. Here, temperatures rising elsewhere, a cold start to Sunday. Mist and fog patches slow to clear, but then plenty of sunny spells developing, particularly across northern parts of the UK. Parts of southern Wales into southwest England, a wet and windy day to come. Met Office warnings out through the day, and this rain slowly pushes its way eastwards as we move through Sunday across southern counties of England. Elsewhere, generally dry with sunny spells. Temperatures near average for most, just some mild air starting to creep into the far southwest. A wet start across the southeast and windy too on Monday morning. This slowly pulls away, and then we've got a mixture of sunny spells and scattered showers across the country. Over the next few days, it remains fairly unsettled, particularly across the north and the west. Temperatures on the mild side.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Thank you very much, Greg. Lots more coming up on today's show. Now, Richard Tice has announced Reform Party will raise the 40p income tax threshold to £70,000. But will this be enough to win some of the seats after the general election? All of that and much more to come. I'm Dawn Nissim and you're with GB News, Britain's news channel. Try not to go too far though, loads coming up.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall?
Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. Weekdays from midday.
Francis, Just Stop Oil have in the past broken the law. I remember distinctly the Dartford crossing. That ended up with 2 jailed, I believe, if I remember correctly. Is it ever justified in your view?
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on. I mean, I would have to say yes. I mean, we're trying to preserve my life, your lives, the lives of your family, and it's not just the planet that we're trying to protect, it's the lives of millions of people. And, you know, we know from history that we have to break the law in order to put pressure on the government and to be listened to.
No one would doubt your sincerity in your views. You genuinely believe in what you fight for. But there are others who think differently. For example, there are Islamist extremists who believe that people will go to hell unless they convert to Islam. They will sincerely, perhaps, break the law in order to force people to convert. In their view, they might be saving people's lives for eternity. There might be abortion activists who say that babies are being murdered and to save their lives we need to break the law to stop people having abortions. Why do you get to say that your moral conviction is the one that's right and other people's individual moral conviction are those that are wrong?
So what's really integral to the Just Stop Oil campaign is the fact that it is a non-violent campaign. That's what separates us from the examples that you've just given. We're absolutely dedicated non-violence, both as a tactic and as a principle. So though we might be breaking the law...
If individuals take it upon themselves to break the law for whatever their course is, surely the way that we decide what society wants in general is democratic and within the law.
Well, of course, we know also that protest is absolutely integral to maintaining and upholding a democracy, and in particular, non-violent protest. I mean, I really can't express to you how severe this situation is, and I'm sure you know this.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello and welcome to GB News Saturday. I'm Dawn Neeson, and for the next 2 hours I'm keeping you company on TV, online and on digital radio, keeping you up to date on the stories that really matter to you. Coming up this hour, Richard Tice has announced the Reform Party will raise the 40p income tax threshold to £70,000 and called for a reduction in stamp duty, inheritance tax and corporation tax. But will this be enough to get some seats in the Commons after the next general election? Then Rishi Sunak has torn into the Welsh Labour Party for its implementation of 20-mile-an-hour zones, saying they're holding Wales back. But guess what? They're spreading. And when you listen to those Labour candidates, it's painfully apparent they don't offer anything new. It's just more of the same. I'm asking, does he have a point? And Trump, let's stick to mad politics, shall we? Trump has had his say on a controversial ruling from the Alabama Supreme Court that frozen embryos are considered children and that a person could be held liable for accidentally destroying them. We'll tell you what he said on that one. Well, blimey, there's enough to talk about there. But the show is nothing without you and your views. So let me know all your thoughts on what we're talking about right now. Email me on gbviews@gbnews.com or message me on our socials @gbnews. It's really, really simple. But first, let's go to Theo Giacomba for some of those news headlines.
Good afternoon. It's 1 minute past 1. I'm Theo Giacomba in the GB newsroom. The UK has reaffirmed its commitment to Ukraine, promising £245 million to produce artillery shells as the country's war with Russia enters its third year. The package will boost critical stockpiles of ammunition as the Royal Air Force completes a further delivery of advanced tank-busting missiles. The Defence Secretary says he's proud that since the invasion, the UK has trained 60,000 Ukrainian troops, adding that no one has done as much for Kyiv than the UK. Grant Shapps says the West will keep going for as long as it takes to fight Russian aggression.
This is a package which will help to provide some of the artillery that's required, particularly on the front line, where Russia has really boosted their production levels. So it's massively important now that we stop Putin. It's going to cost us more if he came further, not least, of course, being terrible for our Ukrainian friends, but it would also be disastrous for the rest of the West.
Shadow Defence Secretary John Healey says the war in Ukraine is a global fight.
I think first to recognise that this isn't just Putin fighting on the battlefield in Ukraine. This is a diplomatic, economic and industrial struggle against wider Russian aggression. And we've got to have a broader UK plan to help defend Ukraine and defeat Putin. So that does mean tightening sanctions, as you say, closing supply chain loopholes and looking to seize the Russian assets that have been stolen to reconstructing Ukraine. It also means ramping up our military support.
The King and Queen have praised the Ukrainian people for their true valour in a message of support. King Charles says he's greatly encouraged by the efforts of the UK and its allies in supporting Kyiv at a time of suffering and need. He says the determination and strength of the Ukrainian people is inspiring. Junior doctors in England are walking out for the 10th time since last March over a pay dispute. The British Medical Association has asked for a 35% pay rise, which the government has described as unreasonable. More than 1.3 million appointments and operations have already been cancelled or rescheduled since industrial action began. The Health Secretary, Victoria Atkins, is calling for the strikes to end, saying she wants to see doctors treating patients, not on picket lines.
I want for this to be resolved. I've come to these negotiations with nothing but good intentions and a genuine desire to find a reasonable solution for junior doctors, but also importantly for patients and the public and the taxpayer. So I still want to try and achieve that, but I can only do that if the Junior Doctors Committee plays their part. Walking out of negotiations in November was not reasonable. They know that I want to go further in addition to the up to 10.3% that they have already received into their bank accounts.
The Defence Secretary has defended Tory MP Lee Anderson, who's under fire for comments he made about protests in London. Labour is calling for the whip to be removed from the former deputy chair after he said the Mayor, Sadiq Khan, had given the capital away to Islamists. Grant Shapps says his comments were born out of frustration following months of demonstrations. Shadow Paymaster General Jonathan Ashworth is also demanding the whip be removed from Liz Truss for using a talk in the US to claim Conservatives in the UK are now operating in a hostile environment. Thousands of cards of support have been sent to King Charles following his cancer diagnosis. The monarch laughed as he read one of them, which had a disgruntled dog on the front saying, "At least you don't have to wear a cone." Around 7,000 cards have been sent from around the world, offering good wishes, with one child writing, "Never give up, be brave, don't push your limits." Others shared their own experiences of cancer, urging the king to stay positive. For the latest stories, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts. Now it's back to GB News Saturday.
Thank you very much, Theo. Right, let's get straight into today's story, shall we? Now, of course, we're in an election year. You may have noticed, I think it's been mentioned just a couple of times. So every party is out vying for your support in the general election. This morning was the turn of Reform UK in Doncaster. Richard Tice announced they would be raising the 40p income tax threshold to £70,000 and including reductions in stamp duty, inheritance tax and corporation tax. Sounds like a mighty good package, doesn't it? Now, joining me now is a GB News political correspondent, Catherine Forster, who has been with Richard this morning at the Reform Party rally, I think we're calling it, aren't we? Catherine, what do you make of it? What's going on?
Well, the Reform Party certainly have a spring in their step here in Doncaster because, as Richard Tice said, only 3 years ago when the party was formed out of the Brexit Party, which was in its turn formed out of UKIP effectively, he said that everybody was laughing at them, that they were a joke, and he says that they're not laughing now. The reason for that, of course, is that they're currently at about 13% in the polls. They're now in a position where they could really take a lot of votes at the next general election. However, that does not translate into seats because they say they're going to stand in many hundred constituencies across the UK. But we know, because of the way that our electoral system works, that even if millions of people voted for them, as they did in 2015 for UKIP, the chances are that they're going to get none or very, very few seats. What's likely to happen is they're going to take a lot of votes from the Conservatives. They are to the right of the Conservatives. They basically say that the Conservatives and Labour are, Richard Tice would say, two sides of the same socialist coin. He says the Conservatives are not Conservative anymore. So people on the right are attracted to them. But the reality is, Richard Tice talks about Starmageddon, the threat of a Labour government. But the Conservatives will tell you that voting for reform is likely to just increase Sir Keir Starmer's majority. Let's have a quick look, though, at some of the policies, because as you've mentioned, announced today a whole huge raft of tax cuts that frankly make Liz Truss look like an absolute model of restraint. So raising the personal allowance at which you start to pay tax from £12,500 to £20,000, raising the rate at which you start to pay higher rate tax from 50 to 70, cut in inheritance tax, cut in corporation tax, cut in stamp duty. The list goes on and on. We've got a national debt of 2.6 trillion. It's not entirely clear how any of this would be paid for, but still, many of the people here really are fed up to the back teeth of the Conservatives. Many of them were Conservative voters. They're horrified at the prospect of of Keir Starmer, and they feel that reform is where they want to put their support, even though they realise ultimately that they're probably not going to get many or any seats out of it. That's another thing, of course, that Reform are pushing for. They'd like to reform the whole electoral system and bring in proportional representation.
Catherine, Richard was very buoyant when you spoke to him this morning. How would you describe the mood there amongst the faithful?
Upbeat, yeah, really upbeat. I've been talking to quite a number of people, including a number of candidates in the next election, and they really feel that they have got the wind in their sails because they feel that the Conservative Party have done a pretty dreadful job over the last few years. They say, Richard Tice said, that they are soaring and that Sunak is sinking. They do believe that. They do think it's an opportunity for them, and they, I mean, looking through this 30-page booklet here of draft ideas, a lot of these are very, very appealing, but I still come back to two things. First of all, how are you going to pay for it? And second of all, you can have all the plans in the world, but if you're not going to be able to translate that into seats in Parliament, in some ways it counts for nothing. I think what it will do potentially, though, is the Conservatives are very worried about the Reform vote, taking voters from them, and it's likely to influence the Conservative Party over the next few months, potentially in moving a little bit more to the right, or certainly if Rishi Sunak loses the next election, perhaps in pushing the Conservative Party further to the right after that.
Interesting times. Catherine Forster, GB News political correspondent at Doncaster Vehicles, with Richard Tice and the Reform Party. Thank you very much, Catherine. Now, for all the best analysis and opinion on that story and everything we're talking about today and everything else, basically, it's a very good website, go to gbnews.com. Now, Rishi Sunak, we've just been talking about him, hasn't he, has torn into Welsh Labour for its implementation of 20-mile-an-hour zones, saying they're holding Wales back. Speaking at the Welsh Conservative Conference, the Prime Minister said, when you listen to those Labour candidates, it's painfully apparent they don't offer anything new. It's just more of the same. Joining me now is GB News host of the Saturday 5, Albie Amakona, and former Labour Minister for Europe, Dennis McShane. Thank you very much for joining me this Saturday afternoon. 20-mile-an-hour zones. Now, I don't drive. I've given up driving because it's almost impossible in London, let's be honest. But I do cycle, and I've been flashed to slow down on my bike. 20-mile-an-hour zones are all over the place. I'm going to come to you first, Dennis, on this one. What do you make...
wear lycra?
Do I...
You're always so elegant in the studio. I'm just curious.
Where's this conversation going? I'm actually wearing fishnet tights, not stockings, gentlemen, behind this desk here. And both of my young men who are accompanying me today have commented me on them. So now I'm being asked about wearing lycra. Yes, I do. But let's talk about 20-mile-an-hour zones, shall we? Dennis? Naughty boy. Come on, what do you reckon?
I was out pushing my granddaughter, 1 year
20 miles an hour.
old, and I noticed crossing a suburban street in South London, there's a huge 20 painted on the road for a very, very good reason, because I hate to say this, but under Rishi Sunak, the number of children killed on our roads has gone up slightly. So I think he should be the last person with 4 cars, including a 120-mile-an-hour BMW Speedster, to be telling us all that any measure that protects children's lives he is opposed to. It's not important. The people aren't interested in this, to be honest. There's some petrol heads in Welsh Conservative parties driving around in Jags who are upset about it. It only applies to roads that are lit by lights in the evening. It's not trunk roads or the motorway or anything. I'm just baffled by Rishi placing bets with Piers Morgan, just doing crazy things well below the dignity level of any British PM.
Yeah, I mean, the reason the 20-mile-an-hour zone thing is important, just not in Wales, is that the police force, British police forces, have issued a record number of fines for 20-mile-an-hour offences last year, as growing numbers of roads across the country have their speed limits cut, despite Rishi Sunak's pledge to avoid slamming a brake. His words, slamming a brakes on the war on the motorists. And to go back to what you were saying, Dennis, basically that there is no correlation between tougher enforcement of 20-mile-an-hour zones and fewer deaths or injuries on the road. So, Albie, what do you make of this creeping 20-mile-an-hour zones, not just in Wales but across the country?
Well, I think it's a taste of what's to come if Labour win the next general election, and that is why we've got to be very careful about voting for parties like Reform that are going to let Keir Starmer in through the back door. This 20-mile-an-hour speed zone policy in Wales has cost the Welsh economy £4 billion a year. This whole idea that Wales doesn't want to build any new roads whatsoever, when actually for the Welsh people it is still the main mode of transportation. You can't take away people's mode of transportation without giving them an alternative, and there's not an alternative in a lot of parts of the country, including in London, especially south of the river, apart from driving. So why are Labour making it more difficult for people who need to drive to get around?
Well, we have to drive, Dennis. I mean, so why 20 miles? It doesn't seem to save any more lives. There's no actual proof that it helps with any pollution issues either. So why are both Labour in Wales and the Conservatives, as a main government, seem not to have a problem with 20-mile-an-hour zones spreading throughout the country? One appeared at the end of my road overnight, and it's like, what?
First time I went to America, Washington, it's more than 40 years ago, very kind of you to refer to young man, there were 20-mile-an-hour limits in big cities because the Americans respect particularly children's lives and old people's lives. And, 701 deaths in the last year. That's one, I think, every 17 minutes or something. And that is just unacceptable. I remember all those arguments, Albie, again, because I'm a wee bit older than you, when we brought in seatbelts. Not me. I mean, I just about passed my driving test. And everybody went bonkers. This is an attack on motorists. We won't be able to get out of our car if there's an accident. It limits our freedom. Women, will have their top halves of their bodies constrained and constricted. For heaven's sake, you don't need... And it worries me now, where I live, near Victoria, the number of Maseratis and Ferraris I see, and you see people just gunning, getting up to 60 miles an hour because we've got no cops on the street to control this.
Dennis, you're speaking about...
Sunak's taking them all off.
You're talking about lots of different things here. Yeah. You're talking about the fact that we don't have enough police on the streets to enforce the speed limits that already exist. You're talking about people that were against seatbelts whenever seatbelts were brought in before I was born. I'm not against seatbelts. Look, I'm not saying there should be no speed limits or that there should be no speed or that there should be no seatbelts. What I'm saying is that having a blanket 20-mile-an-hour speed zone across an entire country is over the top.
I'm sorry, Albert, you're only having it in streets which have lighting. In other words, built-up urban centres. In Japan, the speed limit is 25 miles an hour, and it's an infinitely richer country than Wales. The idea of having sensible speed limits, no accidents, nothing disrupts a road...
But we've already heard from Dawn, the evidence shows that implementing these 20-mile-an-hour speed zones doesn't actually have an impact on the number of deaths.
I've read the evidence. It's just too heavy to go into. There's an absurd propaganda about this. The AA aren't campaigning against it. The RAC isn't campaigning against it. No road safety organisation is saying there's a problem with it. Just relax. We don't need to put petrol-head speedo or speedsters, sorry, not speedos, on our roads, particularly with old people, particularly with young people. Just give them a break. Let them live.
Could you really call someone a petrol head for driving at 30 miles an hour instead of 20?
That's the point I was going to make.
I mean, come on, we're not talking about having no speed limits. We're saying let's drive at 70 miles an hour down a residential road. We are talking about the difference between 20 miles an hour and 30 miles an hour, and to a lot of drivers, 20 miles an hour, and cyclists too, feels incredibly slow in these parts of the country which are not very densely populated.
But it's urban areas. Of course, the trunk roads and the motorways of Wales, you can go at the legal posted speed limit. It's a false argument. And what astonishes me when I was invited to come and talk about this was, what on earth is our Prime Minister, with the problems he faces, with the wreck of the economy, the recession, etc., 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 why is he joining a kind of, an odd, fringe obsession in Wales. It won't win him a single seat, and every grandparent listening to this will say, blooming heck, I don't want my roads to be full of speeding cars.
The reason I was keen to talk about this story is because it's not just in Wales. We're pegging it on what Rishi Sunak actually said in Wales, and it's not been great for the Welsh economy, I think we'll admit that. But 28 million people across the UK, that's 40% of the population, now live in council areas that have 20-mile-an-hour zones, or plan to introduce them. And this is despite last autumn Rishi Sunak saying he was stopping these harebrained schemes, but they just seem to be mushrooming. And I think it's important, Dennis, because the vast majority of people drive. It is important. As Albie's pointed out, in many areas, in many rural areas, public transport is non-existent. I mean, you know, I get stressed if there's a bus not in 4 minutes.
But, Dawn, you went about rural areas. This doesn't apply. It applies to where there is street lighting. Now,
it
that
applies
might be
to most of Wales.
Well, last time I was in Wales, I drove all over the place looking for the nice countryside, the hills, walking. I didn't see any street lights on those roads or motorways.
But the 20-mile-an-hour, it does apply to many of the roads.
Because what drives, certainly my partner, man, she drives a lot more than I do, is when you do drive through London. I totally agree with you about getting through London. And then it switches from 20 to 30. And sometimes it's scribbled on the road, like I brought the photo. I took a photo to show you in case you didn't believe me. Sometimes it's up there on a lamppost or something, and you just don't know. It's much easier to have a 30-mile limit rather than a 35, 37, 38. Much easier to have a 70-mile-an-hour limit on the motorways than they can be very, I don't know, with the gantries. It's just easier for everybody to have a speed limit. And I put it to you again, the 701 children killed on our roads is something that all of us should do everything to combat.
But that's just an argument for the speed limit being 0 miles an hour, isn't it? Then there would be no accidents.
Well, that's a perfectly good point, and there may well be a case in some areas, especially around schools.
For a 0 mile an hour speed limit?
I would have no problems at all if more people like Dawn and me walked and took public transport, but it's another debate. My grandchildren walk to work or push to work. So I just think the public, I'm sorry, are not going to be applauding Rishi with all the problems this nation faces, that's his biggest theme for the spring offensive.
Unfortunately, I could talk about this all day. Well, fortunately, I could talk, but unfortunately, I've run out of time to talk about this all day. And obviously, we have to appreciate that not everybody is as mobile as us, and, you know, they do need cars. Lots of people do need their cars and rely on the cars. But what do you think? This is all about what you think, this show. So GB Views at GB News. I mean, in 20-mile-an-hour zone, do you agree? Are you Team Albie or Team Dennis? 0 mile an hour zones, just walk everywhere, people. Any case, we move on. You're with me, Dawn Neeson, on GB News Saturday, and there's loads more coming up on today's show. Now, let's go across the pond. Trump has had his say on a controversial ruling from the Alabama Supreme Court that frozen embryos are considered children and that a person could be held liable for accidentally destroying them. We'll tell you what he said on that one. It's an amazing story. All of that and much more to come. You're with GB News, Britain's news channel. Don't go too far.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Lee Anderson's Real World, Fridays from 7 p.m.
Dr. Jane Jones, who's the clinical lead for Care After Combat.
Yep.
Jane, thanks for coming. And just tell me a little bit about your organisation. What do you do?
OK, well, thank you for having me here so we can talk about Care After Combat. So we are an organisation, a charity, who work into the prison system, working with military veterans who've somehow got involved with the justice system and
So there's quite a high population of ex-servicemen and women in our prisons. Why is that, do you think?
So 2014, the government did a review of who was resident in UK prisons, and what they found were that military veterans are the highest occupational group, and this obviously raises some concerns. Yeah. So the government wanted to do something about that, and so they supported Care After Combat initially just as a scoping exercise, really, to see if there was any way we could help these men and women actually, understand the problems that led to offending behaviour and go on to lead successful lives.
So what sort of offending behaviour are we talking typically for people that's in prison that's actually served in our armed forces?
Primarily, it's violence.
Yeah.
So that is the highest offence that we work with.
Okay.
But of course, the military, as with everybody else, it's the full range of offending behaviour.
OK, so we're in a pub, Jane, Dr Jane, and I guess for some people, the odd tip of alcohol is good, a bit of fun of a weekend, relax, let your hair down. But for some people, alcohol is not always their best friend, and I guess that plays a part in some of your veterans that end up inside.
Yeah. Absolutely. So, speaking from my own experience, a good 2/3 of the people I work with have some kind of mental health problem or mental health difficulty, struggling to either adapt into civilian life or with some of the traumas they've experienced during service. People might self-medicate with alcohol to manage some of those thoughts and feelings.
Yeah. Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Curse, on the Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. This Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Curse, on the Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. This Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to GB News Saturday with me, Dawn Neeson, on your TV, online and on digital radio. Now, Sadiq Khan has spoken out this morning over Lee Anderson's comments about Sadiq Khan and Islamists. And let's have a listen to what he has to say, shall we?
Well, these comments from a senior Conservative are Islamophobic, are anti-Muslim and are racist. We've seen over the last 2 days confirmation that over the last few months there's been an increase in anti-Muslim cases by more than 330%. These comments pour fuel on the fire of anti-Muslim hatred. And I'm afraid the deafening silence from Rishi Sunak and from the Cabinet is them condoning this racism. And I'm afraid it confirms to many people across the country that there's a hierarchy when it comes to racism. I think it's really important to call out anti-Semitism. It's really important to call out misogyny. It's really important to call out homophobia. But surely it must also be important to call out anti-Muslim hatred. And I tell you this, my concern is there'll be people across the country, people who are Muslim or look like Muslims, who'll be really concerned about entering into politics because they know if these are the sorts of comments that are said against me by a senior Conservative, what chance do they have?
Are you concerned that Lee Anderson's comments may have compromised your safety and security?
I'm quite clear from the police officers I've spoken to, from the organisations that work with Muslim communities across the country. We've seen a massive increase in Islamophobia, anti-Muslim hatred over the last few months. It isn't just about my security, my family's security, my staff's security. It's about the people across our country who are at the receiving end of racism, of anti-Muslim hatred and of Islamophobia. Racism is racism. I'm unclear why Rishi Sunak, why members of his cabinet aren't calling this out and aren't condemning this. It's like they're complicit in this sort of racism. And I think the message it sends is Muslims are fair game when it comes to racism and anti-Muslim hatred. It's not good enough in 2024 in the United Kingdom.
Do you think Muslims are safe in the UK today?
Look, the evidence over the last few months is a massive increase in anti-Semitism and a massive increase in anti-Muslim hatred. I think both are appalling, both are shocking, both are the scourge of our society. Just like the Conservatives claim to be on the side of Jewish people, why don't they show they're on the side of Muslim people as well? Racism is racism. There shouldn't be a hierarchy.
Are you concerned? I mean, what would you say to his criticism that you have failed to tackle extremism in London?
If the government, if senior Conservatives want to give me more power over policing, we can have that conversation. The idea that a politician can tell the police which marches should be allowed, which marches shouldn't be allowed, can tell the police which marches to ban, which marches not to ban, is a really slippery slope. What's next? Politicians telling the police who to arrest, who to charge, who to prosecute. If the government or the Conservatives have got concerns about the powers the police have, they should give the police more powers. I'm quite clear in relation to the powers I have, and I'm also quite clear that it's really important not to allow mainstream politicians, senior members of the Conservative Party, to spread hatred. And I tell you this, I've spoken to Muslims over the last 18 hours. I've spoken to Muslims and others over the course of the last few days, weeks and months. Many are scared. Many are scared about them being the receiving end of racism, the receiving end of Islamophobia. Just like we stand shoulder to shoulder with the Jewish communities across the country, being at the receiving end of anti-Semitism, why is it allowable for Muslims to be treated this way? And I'm disappointed at Rishi Sunak. I'm disappointed at members of the cabinet. They should know better.
You talk about the deafening silence. So far we've had Sajid Javid, who's come out, Robert Buckland and Nazgani, and that's it from the Tory benches to condemn these comments. Do you think there's a problem of Islamophobia in the Conservative Party?
But what's important is for people in positions of power and influence to understand not just the consequences of their own language, but to understand the experiences of minorities across this country. Well, I think it's wrong to condone this sort of behaviour, and the silence, the deafening silence, is condoning this sort of behaviour. I think anti-Semitism is wrong. I think misogyny is wrong. I think homophobia is wrong, and I think anti-Muslim hatred is wrong as well. Racism is racism. And what the Conservatives have shown by their words and by their actions is they're condoning racism, they're condoning anti-Muslim hatred, they're condoning Islamophobia.
OK, that is a very angry London Mayor Sadiq Khan there on Lee Anderson's Islamist comments. You're with me, Dawn Neeson, on GB News Saturday, and there's lots more coming up, including a lot more on that particular story. As you heard, Sadiq Khan angry there. But first, let's get the news headlines with Theo Giacomo.
It's 32 minutes past 1. I'm Theo Giacomo in the GB newsroom. The UK has reaffirmed its commitment to Ukraine, promising £245 million to produce artillery shells as the country's war with Russia enters its third year. The package will boost critical stockpiles of ammunition as the Royal Air Force completes a further delivery of advanced tank-busting missiles. The Defence Secretary, Grant Shapps, says he's proud that since the invasion, the UK has trained 60,000 Ukrainian troops, adding that no one has done as much for Kyiv than the UK. The King and Queen have also praised the Ukrainian people for their true valour. In a message of support, King Charles says he's greatly encouraged by the efforts of the UK and its allies in supporting Kyiv at a time of suffering and need. He said the determination and strength of the Ukrainian people is inspiring. Junior doctors in England are walking out for the 10th time since March last year over a pay dispute. The British Medical Association has asked for a 35% pay rise, which the government has described as unreasonable. More than 1.3 million appointments and operations have already been cancelled or rescheduled since industrial action began. For the latest stories, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Thank you very much, Theo. Remember, you can get in touch about all the topics we've been discussing today by emailing me on gbviews@gbnews.com or message me on our socials at gbnews. Really simple. Loads more coming up on today's show. Now, for many people, it's their pride and joy, but for men who are losing their follicles, it's no laughing matter. I'm not laughing. Would you consider a hair transplant, though? Apparently, 1 out of 4 men would. All of that and much more coming up on today's show. I'm Dawn Neeson, and you're with GB News, Britain's news channel. Don't go too far now.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News Breakfast. Every day from 6 a.m.
So the highway code was amended recently. Passed me by, but anyway, a new poll suggests this has made no difference to the safety of road users, and I could believe that.
Yeah, there was an awful crash in London, wasn't there? A bus and a pedestrian yesterday.
Fatality.
So we're asking, is the highway code fit for purpose, or should we just scrap it altogether? That's our debate this morning, and we're joined by Danny Kelly. She argues highways are not fit for purpose, and cycling instructor Anna Hughes thinks they are. Good morning to you both.
You see, Anna, I think it's a good thing. I think the highway code is a good thing. I just don't think that any of us pay any attention to it, or we should all be tested on it quite regularly, I would have thought. We should have revision courses in it.
Yeah, I think you just summed it up, Eamon, by saying the changes passed you by. I actually asked a few of my fellow cyclists and pedestrians, what is classified as vulnerable road users, about this very thing. I said, has the new highway code made things safer for you? And most people said, not at all. Drivers don't know what it is. They don't know what the changes are. They probably don't know what the rules are to start with. And as you've just said, doing refreshers is a really good idea. It's a bit bizarre that we're given a license to operate this quite dangerous machinery, and then we're never tested again, and especially not on the highway code, which is, especially when it changes, why wouldn't we be retested on that or have to do refresher courses on it? You know, there are conflicts on the road, there are fatalities. It makes sense to be aware of what the highway code says, because it is there to keep us safe.
Yeah, Danny Kelly, when I think back, I think it was 1999 I passed my driving test. Hardly any bikes on the road then, to be honest, probably virtually none.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQ's Live here on GB News. Every Wednesday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions when Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer go head-to-head in the House of Commons.
We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's Live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
Welcome back to GB News Saturday with me, Dawn Neeson, on your TV, online and on digital radio. Now, for many people, it's their pride and joy. But for men who are losing their follicles, that's hair for you and me, it's no laughing matter. New research shows how 1 in 4 men in the UK are considering a hair transplant in 2024, with a treatment around hair loss more accessible and accepted. Joining me now to talk about this is hair transplant Dr. Gul Dwan. Hello, thank you very much for joining me this afternoon. Now, this is one of those things. There's so many things that we snigger, especially women, we snigger. I tease my husband constantly about this, but it's actually no laughing matter. Mental health issues around it, so much wrapped up in masculinity and hair. So tell us a bit more about hair transplants, how they work, and are they becoming more acceptable?
Thank you. Actually, hair transplantation is becoming very popular among men recently. It is not creating hair follicles from the scratch. It is just replacing the hair follicles from the back of the head to the balding and receding parts. So it's like 6 to 8 hours procedure. And after a certain time, the men get back their hair. In Turkey, recently over 1 million people are having hair transplant from all around the world.
I'm just reading here that 70% of men experience hair loss, and remarkably, 1 in 4 see first signs of baldness before they reach the age of 21. Hello, I think Dr. Gould. Oh, I think we've lost Dr. Gould. Hopefully we'll be able to get her back. Well, let's talk about someone who's experienced this. And joining me now is Benjamin Dridge, who you've had a hair transplant.
I have, yes.
Go on, Benjamin. Tell me exactly how long ago.
Literally 9 days ago.
This is amazing,
yeah.
right? And you are just, I'm not being rude, you are 30...
I'm 33.
33 years old. Yeah, hair transplant just a week ago, literally. So tell me your story. Why did you decide to have this done?
So I've been losing my hair since I was probably in my early 20s. Obviously genetic, father, my brother, both bald people, and they've embraced it. Everyone said to me, shave it off. I was just not ready to do it. I took the thing, I looked into a few things.
Oh, wow, there's a picture of you before your transplant.
That's actually, it looks awful, but that's actually what I was like before.
Astonishing.
Obviously, I'm at the early stages, got a long way to go, but I'm really happy with the results.
And that's a close-up of your head we're seeing now?
After the surgery. But everyone at McCann, McCann in Turkey that I used, is just, right from the moment we landed, I didn't have to do anything. It was all, I was driven to the clinic, driven to the hotel, totally looked after. They give me very nice Turkish cuisine for lunch, and it's just a fantastic experience, and absolutely loved it. I'm so pleased, and I feel like I'm going to get my confidence back. And
how much does it? I mean, because as I said, I tease the husband constantly about this, but it's not a laughing matter. How is it affecting your mental health?
I don't think there's people that I've known probably for 5 or 6 years that have never seen me not wear a hat. That is literally how it affected me, but people wouldn't even know that. They've never seen my head, so they wouldn't even know how it affected my mental health. But I think for men, it's not really spoken about, but it does affect, especially young men. Yeah, their mental health massively, definitely.
And it's amazing. Just a week after your treatment. So I mean, how long are you in the clinic, and how long does the procedure take?
So I've actually got 4,600 follicles, which has been transplanted, which is quite a lot. So my procedure actually took 11.5 hours from start to finish. Wow. But that includes stopping for lunch. But it was a very long...
And you're awake through this, are you?
It's local anaesthetic, so it's just I'm just all numb. But yeah, I was just sat there. I was listening to podcasts and.
And is it like Dr. Gouldwine was saying just now before we sadly lost her? They take the hair from the back of your head.
Yeah, so the donor area. Now it's an FUE. They used to take a strip of hair, so you used to have a scar. But now it's called, now they take it from multiple areas so you don't have a scar. So it's literally all around the sides. But as you see in that photo, my actual hair on the sides was quite long. It was just the middle part that was balding.
Yeah. OK, I think we can go back to the doctor now. Dr. Gouldwine, are you there? Have you come back to join us?
Yes, I'm sorry.
Hello,
I thought we had a connection problem, yeah.
Yeah, not a problem. It happens a lot, don't worry. I was just saying that sort of like 70% of men experience hair loss, and remarkably, 1 in 4 men see the first signs of this before they reach the age of 21. So Benjamin here, isn't that unusual that he was so young when he started experiencing this problem?
That's true. I mean, when the hair loss speed is very high, really, we generally advise the patient to wait for a while. After the hair speed loss is slowed down, then we invite them to a hair transplantation. So the ideal age will be based on the person. Of course, it changes, but over like 24.
And how do you decide who is suitable? I mean, do you have to have a lot of hair at the back of the head to be transplanted forward?
Yes, there are multiple factors that define if you are a good candidate for a hair transplant. The availability of the donor area, your medical conditions, as I mentioned before, the hair speed loss, all these variables affect if you are a suitable candidate, but most of them really are suitable, so we invite them to hair transplantation.
Mm-hmm. And have you seen an increase in British patients coming to you for hair transplants?
Yeah, especially after pandemic, we see a growing in the number of patients coming from UK to Turkey for hair transplantation. Our portfolio, like 48% are coming from United Kingdom.
Okay, Dr. Gouldwan, thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. Absolutely fascinating. Thank you very much. Benjamin, just one final word to you. We're running out of time. What difference has it made to you?
Massively. I feel like, obviously, we're still at the early stage, but as it grows, I think as my hair grows, my confidence will grow. So.
And I have to ask the $64,000 question. Is it expensive?
No, not for what it's doing to me.
Right, OK, worth every penny.
OK, thank you much.
Perfect. Thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. That's Benjamin Bridge, who, as you can see, has got a head of hair back. Amazing. You're watching GB News with me, Dawn Neeson, on Saturday afternoon. Thank you for joining me. Loads more coming up on today's show. Now, Donald Trump, who doesn't need a hair transplant, obviously, has had his say on a controversial ruling from the Alabama Supreme Court that frozen embryos are considered children and that a person could be held liable for accidentally destroying them. We'll tell you what he said about that, and it's a bit interesting. All of that and much more to come. You're with GB News, Britain's news channel. See you soon.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Patrick Christie's Tonight. Weekdays from 9 p.m.
Mike Freer joins me now. Mike, thank you very much for coming into the studio.
Thank you for inviting me.
Firstly, how are you?
It's been a busy day, and it's been quite a traumatic experience. It's a real wrench to walk away from a job that you love, but also a constituency that you've become. You know, I live there; it's my home, and I regard many of my constituents as friends, and it is an amazing place. And to walk away from that is really quite. It's quite an emotional wrench to think this was a job I loved, but unfortunately I can't do it anymore.
Can you talk me through the process? Because you mentioned about the alleged arson attack, etc., being the final straw, but this has been a really quite vile journey to get to this point. So what kind of threats have you had? What's that look like?
Well, like every MP, I mean, you day in, day out, you get abusive emails, you get low-level stuff that, whether we should accept it, but we do, it's graffiti, you know, it's things like, you know, in the past I've had a mock Molotov cocktail left on the office door, meaning we had to evacuate the whole building. I've come out of my house and found a note on my car. Where I live is common knowledge, but what I drive is less so. And it's a few weeks after John Mann had the wheel nuts on his car tampered with. So that all kind of makes you get a bit, you know, what on earth's going on. But I've had two run-ins with the organisation that was Muslims Against Crusades, and people like Anjem Chowdhury, who was behind that organisation, been to prison. But online it said, I used to do surgery in mosques, so I wanted to go out and see people. And online, it's a picture of me saying, you're not welcome in our mosque, let Stephen Timms be a pointed reminder. So it's not very subtle.
Well, just for our viewers and listeners who might not remember that.
Stephen Timms, of course, was stabbed by a woman who'd been radicalised. Thank heavens he survived. So it was a very unsubtle.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to GB News Saturday with me, Dawn Neeson, on your TV, online and on digital radio. Now, lots of you have been getting in touch, and I love this. Please do. GB Views at GB News. It's on your screen. There, look, read it. Send your messages in, because we're going to read them out, basically. So, we're having the debate about 20-mile-an-hour zones, and I think one of my panellists decided that 0-mile-an-hour zones would be a good idea. Couldn't follow that. But Janet, good afternoon. Janet says, the real problem isn't the speed of our cars. The problem is there are too many people in the country. Fair point. I must admit, I don't cycle, so I don't drive, so I'm a good girl on that one. And meanwhile, on the reform issue, we've heard from Richard Tice this morning as well. Tony says raising the tax personal allowance to 20k is the most sensible policy ever. Make work actually pay. The difference between working on minimum wage and benefits needs to be widened, and this will go a long way to fixing the problem. And meanwhile, one quick one on the Ukraine. Obviously, 2 years since that war started. Leon says, good afternoon, Dawn. Good afternoon, Leon. The 250 million we've just given to Ukraine makes a sum of 7 billion. It's hard to swallow when our own nation is in managed decline and we don't have money to pay our own. This is the great debate, isn't it? I mean, it's like, you know, we are not exactly in a healthy state ourselves, are we? It's a tricky one, this, isn't it? But what happens if we stop funding? Any case, let's move across the other side of the pond, shall we? Donald Trump has said he supports the availability of IVF treatment. A ruling from the Alabama Supreme Court that frozen embryos are considered children and that a person could be held liable for accidentally destroying them, kind of like murder. I'm very confused by this, so I've got someone who's an expert, thankfully. Chairman of Republicans Overseas UK, Greg Swenson. Greg, thank you so much for joining me on this one. Can you explain a little bit what's going on here? Because our politics are mad, but yours are madder.
Yeah, I think in this case, the left and much of the legacy media made a big deal out of this on Thursday, and they really shouldn't have. This is not a pro-life versus pro-abortion argument. This is a specific case about IVF, and it really is built around the protection for the couples that were actually patients of the clinic. And so they're obviously pro-IVF. And so there was an accident and some of the embryos were destroyed, again, by accident. It doesn't happen often. No, of course. And the question for the court was, did the embryos get the protection that a human would get? Or in the case of a pregnant woman being killed, is that 2 homicides or just 1? And in most states, it's 2 homicides. So the question for the court was, does an embryo, we know the statute says the embryo in the womb gets those protections. The question is, does an embryo outside of the womb? And of course, there was no such thing as IVF when these laws were written. So they're just saying all the court is saying is to the legislature, make the rule, because it's not in writing. So we can't really make an exception when it's not specifically designed. So this was really a technical thing.
Right, and the left are trying to capitalise because Donald Trump is sort of like, you know, anti-abortion, and many states are toughening up on that.
So they tried to make it an abortion issue debate, and that was not really accurate. So both Biden and Kamala Harris came out with these outrageous statements that had nothing to do with the case and nothing to do with the issue.
OK, so talk to me about Nikki Haley, Trump's nearest Republican challenger, although she's 30 points behind, isn't she, in her home state. She's more to the right on this issue than Trump himself.
Yeah, I would argue that, but she's to the right of Trump on many issues. I mean, she's arguably more of a conservative than Trump. Now, they disagree on some things, and Trump has a much better appeal to the populist and even libertarian wing of the party. But it's really not conservative versus liberal at all, because she, on most measures, could be defined as more conservative than Trump. Yeah.
The other thing, I mean, she does seem to be getting under his skin, even though she's not that close. I mean, you know,
she has.
The fact that sort of like, you know, he's called her a rhino, Republican in name only.
Which is not true. I mean, you can criticize Mrs. Haley on several things, but that's not one of them, I would argue. And so he could probably say that about other candidates that were running against him much earlier in the process that have since dropped out. But I don't think that's a safe claim. But again, they can disagree on some issues. She is getting under his skin a little bit. She's been much more proactive and much more aggressive since Ron DeSantis dropped out, and leaving her as the only candidate still in the race.
And when will this be decided? When will?
Well, it depends. You know, it could be tonight with the South Carolina primary. You know, if she outperforms or overachieves and only loses by 20 or less, then I think that could be considered a victory. She'll stay in the race. The polls have moved from Trump by mid-30s to Trump by mid-20s. So she is doing better more recently in the polls. That often happens in a race. And then you have Super Tuesday in a few weeks, and that's really, make or break. I think she'll hang on till Super Tuesday. Perhaps she'll drop out.
Super Tuesday is?
It's March 5th.
March 5th, right.
And that's a big day, and there's a lot of electoral votes. So I think she's going to stick around at least till then. It doesn't look like she can win any state. If she can't win her own, she can't win a state that she wasn't governor of. So that's
Greg,
the real
we have
question.
to leave it there, unfortunately.
Great to be
Thank
here,
you
Dawn.
so
Thank
much.
you.
That's Greg Swenson, Chair of Republicans Overseas, talking about Trump and all things American. I call it Trump world because it's a bit mad sometimes. Right, you're with me, Dawn Neeson, on GB News Saturday. Lots more coming up on today's show, including Sadiq Khan, Rishi Sunak, and that comment by Lee Anderson. But here's the weather before we get to all of that stuff.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Greg Dewhurst and welcome to your latest GB News weather. We've got showers around, but they're slowly fading away. We'll see some mist and fog patches before further wet and windy weather spreads in for Sunday and into Monday, and that's courtesy of this area of low pressure. Met Office warnings for the heavy rain falling on already saturated ground. We could see some flooding issues over the next few days. Showers fading away this evening time, lots of clear skies developing. That will allow temperatures to fall away, close to if not below freezing overnight. So some frost in places, some icy stretches from recent showers, and also some mist and fog patches. Some wet and windy weather starting to move into parts of Cornwall by the end of the night. Here, temperatures rising elsewhere, a cold start to Sunday. Mist and fog patches slow to clear, but then plenty of sunny spells developing, particularly across northern parts of the UK. Parts of southern Wales into southwest England, a wet and windy day to come. Met Office warnings out through the day, and this rain slowly pushes its way eastwards as we move through Sunday across southern counties of England. Elsewhere, generally dry with sunny spells. Temperatures near average for most, just some mild air starting to creep into the far southwest. A wet start across the southeast and windy too on Monday morning. This slowly pulls away, and then we've got a mixture of sunny spells and scattered showers across the country. Over the next few days, it remains fairly unsettled, particularly across the north and the west. Temperatures on the mild side.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Thank you very much, Greg. Now, there's loads more coming up on today's cracking show. Richard Tice has announced Reform Party will raise the 40p income tax threshold to £70,000 and call for reductions in stamp duty, inheritance tax and corporation tax. But will this be enough to get some seats in Commons after that general election? All that and much more to come. I'm Dawn Neeson. This is GB News. You're watching, so don't go too far.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Patrick Christie's Tonight. Weekdays from 9 p.m.
So a new poll has revealed that Gen Z or Gen Z, I don't know how I'm supposed to say it, and British boys and men are more likely to believe that feminism has done more harm than good when compared with older respondents. So the polling also found that a quarter of UK males aged 16 to 29 believe it's harder to be a man than a woman, with 1 in 5 looking favourably upon controversial influencer Andrew Tate. 37% of them also agree that the phrase toxic masculinity is unhelpful. So, with Gen Z boys increasingly holding this view, has feminism done more harm than good? Let me know your thoughts. Email me, gbviews@gbnews.com, tweet me @gbnews, and make sure you take part in our poll. But I'll bring you those results shortly. Going head-to-head on this tonight are author and commentator Anna May Mangan and YouTuber and social media influencer Pearl Davies. Both of you, thank you very much. Pearl, I'll start with you. Has feminism done more harm than good, especially when it comes to these Gen Z boys?
Yes, it has. Feminism really has turned into a bunch of crybaby women that want to complain that we're not given equal opportunity when really women are given more opportunity than men. And so, yeah, I would say feminism is a hate group and it's a bunch of crybaby women.
Anna, would you like to come back to that? Crybaby women feminism, apparently.
We've got a right lad with us tonight with Pearl and her opinions, haven't we? How could it possibly do harm? Pearl wouldn't do. I hope you vote. I assume you do. I hope you're not chained to the kitchen sink at home. I'm not sure if you've got a job, so I don't know very much about you, but you're probably, if there's a bloke doing the same thing as you, you're probably earning less than him. So, of course, feminism is something that it got us the vote in the first place, and it's still doing a power of good. It's just whingy men, and actually, I changed that. They're lads, they're not men.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall?
Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
Hello, you lovely people. Welcome to GB News Saturday. Hope you're having a wonderful afternoon. I'm Dawn Neeson, and for the next hour, I'll be keeping you company on TV, online and on digital radio, keeping you up to date on all the stories that really matter to you. Coming up this hour, Richard Tice has announced the Reform Party will raise the 40p income tax threshold to £70,000 and called for reductions in stamp duty, inheritance tax and corporation tax. But will that be enough to get some seats in the Commons after the general election? And then Sadiq Khan says Rishi Sunak is complicit in the anti-Muslim hatred spread as the Cabinet failed to call out and condemn, his words, the comments made by former Deputy Chair Lee Anderson. And the government pledges £250 million to help the war effort in Ukraine as today marks the horrific second anniversary of Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine. But should we spend even more money war effort while we struggle at home? But this show is not about me, it's not even about the people out there talking to me in my head. It's about you and your views. So let me know your thoughts on all of the stories we're discussing today. Email me at gbviews, gbnews.com, or message me on our socials. We're at GBNews. But first, the lovely Theo Chikomba, who's not that lovely, I've just found out is an Arsenal fan, is here with your news headlines.
Good afternoon, it's 1 minute past 2. I'm Theo Chikomba in the GB newsroom. The UK has reaffirmed its commitment to Ukraine, promising £245 million to produce artillery shells as the country's war with Russia enters its third year. The package will boost critical stockpiles of ammunition as the Royal Air Force completes a further delivery of advanced tank-busting missiles. The Defence Secretary says he's proud that since the invasion, the UK has trained 60,000 Ukrainian troops, adding that no one has done as much for Kyiv than the UK. Grant Shapps says the West will keep going for as long as it takes to fight Russian aggression.
This is a package which will help to provide some of the artillery that's required, particularly on the front line, where Russia has really boosted their production levels. So it's massively important now that we stop Putin. It's going to cost us more if he came further, not least, of course, being terrible for our Ukrainian friends, but it would also be disastrous for the rest of the West.
Shadow Defence Secretary John Healey says the war in Ukraine is a global fight.
I think first to recognise that this isn't just Putin fighting on the battlefield in Ukraine. This is a diplomatic, economic and industrial struggle against wider Russian aggression. And we've got to have a broader UK plan to help defend Ukraine and defeat Putin. So that does mean tightening sanctions, as you say, closing supply chain loopholes and looking to seize the Russian assets that have been stolen to reconstructing Ukraine. It also means ramping up our military support.
Meanwhile, the King and Queen have praised the Ukrainian people for their true valour in a message of support. King Charles says he's greatly encouraged by the efforts of the UK and its allies in supporting Kyiv at a time of suffering and need. He said the determination and strength of the Ukrainian people is inspiring. The London mayor has accused the Prime Minister of condoning racism following a senior Tory MP's comments on protests in the capital. Lee Anderson's being criticised for saying Sadiq Khan had given the capital away to Islamists following months of demonstrations. Labour is now calling for the whip to be removed from the former deputy chair. The London mayor says it's important to call out anti-Muslim hatred just like any other form of hatred. And he accused the MP of pouring fuel on the fire of anti-Muslim sentiment.
Look, these comments from a senior Conservative are Islamophobic, are anti-Muslim and are racist. We've seen over the last 2 days confirmation that over the last few months there's been an increase in anti-Muslim cases by more than 330%. These comments pour fuel on the fire of anti-Muslim hatred. And I'm afraid the deafening silence from Rishi Sunak and from the Cabinet is them condoning this racism.
Junior doctors in England are walking out for the 10th time since March last year over a pay dispute. The British Medical Association has asked for a 35% pay rise, which the government has described as unreasonable. More than 1.3 million appointments and operations have already been cancelled or rescheduled since industrial action began. The Health Secretary, Victoria Atkins, is calling for the strikes to end, saying she wants to see doctors treating patients, not on picket lines.
I want for this to be resolved. I've come to these negotiations with nothing but good intentions and a genuine desire to find a reasonable solution for junior doctors, but also importantly for patients and the public and the taxpayer. So I still want to try and achieve that, but I can only do that if the Junior Doctors Committee plays their part. Walking out of negotiations in November was not reasonable. They know that I want to go further in addition to the up to 10.3% that they have already received into their bank accounts.
British Airways has been rated as one of the worst airlines for passenger satisfaction. A survey by Consumer Group, which says the airline had the third joint lowest score for long-haul flights. BA also received 2 out of 5 stars for boarding experience and value for money, but managed to achieve 3 stars for another 6 categories. The company says it was hit by several factors outside of its control last year, such as industrial strikes and by air traffic controllers. For the latest stories, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts. Now it's back to GB News Saturday.
Thank you very much, Theo. Just remind me not to talk to you about football anymore. Right, OK, let's get straight into today's story, shall we? Now, of course, we're in the election year. You may have noticed it. I think a couple of people have mentioned it once or twice. But every party is out to get your votes for that general election, which is looming. Today, it's the Turn of the Reform UK rally in Doncaster. Richard Tice, that's the boss, announced they would be raising the 40p income tax threshold to £70,000 and included reductions in stamp duty, inheritance tax and corporation tax. Now, joining me to explain how he's going to achieve this is GB News political correspondent Catherine Forster. Catherine, talk to good talk, walk to good walk, but how's it all going to happen?
Well, that's an excellent question, Dawn, because you can make all the promises in the world, and indeed Reform are making a lot of pledges. I've been going through this 30-page draft, a potential sort of outline of a manifesto, and the tax cuts that Reform are promising make Liz Truss look like an absolute model of restraint. So the personal tax threshold raised to 20,000, higher tax threshold raised to 70,000, cuts in inheritance tax, corporation tax, stamp duty, you name it. unbelievably expensive at a time when we've got a national debt of £2.6 trillion. Now, Richard Tice says they will make the money through savings. He says there's lots of waste in government, that they will make the money through growth. But of course, there were lots of very big cuts to public services over the years during austerity, weren't there? And also growth takes time. So one thing to promise these things, another thing entirely to deliver them. And that's the other issue, of course, isn't it? Because the chances are that although Reform are in a good mood here, they're riding high in the polls, they're up at about 13% now. They really believe they can take a lot of votes at the next election. But the problem is they might take a lot of votes. They might even take millions of votes, as UKIP did back in 2015. But given the voting system that we have, first past the post, it's unlikely that they're going to take many or indeed any seats. So they can make all these pledges, they can make all these promises, really safe in the knowledge that they're not ultimately going to have to deliver them. But the message from here is basically politics is broken, they say. They know that people are very, very fed up with 13 years of Conservative government. Taxes at a 70-year high, public services not in a good place, and that they're not particularly enamoured of Sir Keir Starmer either. They want people to vote for them. They talk about Starmageddon. They say that the disaster of a Labour government. But of course, because Reform are on the right, they're going to take more votes from the Tories than they are from Labour. And the reality is probably that that's ultimately just going to help Sir Keir Starmer to an even bigger majority. So lots of people here feeling that politics is broken, fed up with the main parties, feeling that they want to do their bit. But I don't think they'll be winning many seats at the next election.
Catherine, the other big story I want to talk to you about today is Sadiq Khan was speaking out this morning about, sounded quite angry, about Lee Anderson's comments about Islamists. What do you make of what he had to say?
Yes, strong words from Sadiq Khan, Mayor of London, just in the last half hour or so. Unsurprisingly, really, given what Lee Anderson said yesterday afternoon on GB News, basically that Sadiq Khan and his mates, that Islamists, he said, had taken over London. The mayor saying racism is racism, this must stop. There's been a huge increase in Islamophobic incidents, and that this is atrocious behaviour, he believes. Lee Anderson really is coming under a lot of pressure. We know that he's not to everybody's tastes. Some people love what he says. They think it's how people are speaking out there around the country, that he talks like ordinary people. But he's offended a huge number of politicians in Westminster, Labour, Lib Dems, of course, as you would expect, but also many within his own party. Sajid Javid, former Home Secretary, is absolutely furious. He called him out on X last night about this, and there are plenty of Conservative MPs now really putting pressure on Prime Minister Rishi Sunak to withdraw the whip from Lee Anderson. Worth mentioning, I think, too, he's not the only Conservative MP in hot water, because Liz Truss has been over in the United States talking with Steve Bannon, basically many would say peddling conspiracy theories, saying that she was effectively brought down by the deep state, that she needs a bigger bazooka, asking Steve Bannon if he would like to come over and help Nigel Farage reconfigure the Conservative Party. So plenty of cross MPs across the political spectrum, but plenty of cross-Conservative MPs saying that Rishi Sunak should boot both Lee Anderson and Liz Truss out of the Conservative Party, but I wouldn't hold your breath on that.
Catherine, thank you very much. That's Catherine Forster, GB News political correspondent, joining us there from Doncaster. Now, before we talk about this further, let's have a look at what the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, actually had to say.
Comments from a senior Conservative are Islamophobic, are anti-Muslim and are racist. I'm unclear why Rishi Sunak, why members of his cabinet aren't calling this out and aren't condemning this. It's like they're complicit in this sort of racism. And I think the message it sends is Muslims are fair game when it comes to racism and anti-Muslim hatred. It's not good enough in 2024 in the United Kingdom.
He's very passionate, very angry, isn't he? Right, joining me now is 2/5 of the Saturday Five, which is coming tonight, Darren Grimes and Benjamin Butterworth. Thank you very much. How do you feel about described as 2/5?
I don't mind.
No?
I don't mind. Not at all.
Darren's lost a lot of weight. So he used to be 3/5.
Oh, ouch! You both look absolutely wonderful. Now, this story is developing. You've heard what Sadiq Khan has had to say this morning. I'm going to come to you first on this one, Benjamin. What do you make initially of what Lee Anderson has said and what Sadiq Khan has said this morning?
I mean, I think it's right to say that Lee Anderson was racist, that he was peddling lines that empower racists, and even Sajid Javid, the former Conservative Health Secretary, has said so. But I also take serious issue with Lee Anderson, like Suella Braverman, the former Home Secretary, saying that Islamists have taken control. Because among the many problems with that comment, one of the things that's so dangerous is that empowers the people who really are Islamists, who really do have dangerous ideas. It sends a message to that small, dangerous cult in this country that they're having a huge impact on our politics. And I think it's not only false to say that they are controlling Parliament or controlling the Mayor of London, that's deeply insulting, but it's also false to encourage them to think that they're actually getting somewhere, because most people, most Muslims, don't think like that.
What do you make of it, Darren?
Well, look, Sadiq Khan is a politician who's appeared on Press TV, which is Iranian state television, calling moderate Muslims Uncle Toms, which is an incredibly derogatory way to describe people. And he's also, let's not forget, been part of a Labour Party that not once but twice tried to put Jeremy Corbyn in number 10 Downing Street. So, frankly, I think Lee Anderson shouldn't be taking any lectures, I nearly put an extra word in there, Dawn, any lectures from the Labour Party on that particular issue. I think this comes down...
Hang on, if the Conservatives treated Lee Anderson as Labour did Jeremy Corbyn, which is the example you just chose to give up, well, then Lee Anderson wouldn't have the Tory whip. Because
no, they would have tried to put him into number 10 twice, Benjamin, so that's quite different.
Yeah, but you know full well that political parties change. The Conservatives have had some pretty rapid changes in the last 14 years, and the fact is that Jeremy Corbyn will never be a Labour MP. He's been kicked out of the party altogether. It wasn't that popular at the time with supporters, but that's what he did. So why shouldn't they do the same to Lee Anderson?
I don't believe they should. I think there will be many people who actually say, look, I don't think Sadiq Khan is a puppet of any nature. I think Sadiq Khan is an intelligent man who I happen to vehemently disagree with.
But that's not what Lee Anderson said.
Yeah, so I think actually this is part of a two-pronged problem here, which is actually the intimidation tactics to accuse people of racism, to actually try and shut down debate, are tactics and tools that are used far too often. Ben Jamal of the Palestine Solidarity Campaign, they're the ones, by the way, that projected that genocidal chant onto Elizabeth Tower or Big Ben, that he said actually he wants MPs to be locking the door of Parliament, living in fear, essentially, is what he's saying. And I think this is a tactic to actually shut down. So accusing Lee Anderson of racism, I think, is an intimidation tactic in and of itself.
What you're talking about there is people who are making dangerous ideas that might be matters for the police.
Hundreds of thousands of them.
And no one would dispute that, least of all me. But what is so dangerous is the way to try and conflate those people that some might call extreme Muslims or having extreme ideas with the moderate Mayor of London. And the truth is that we know that Sadiq Khan faces more serious police-level threats to his safety than any politician in the country. Now, the reason for that is obvious. It's because he's a Muslim and a victim of racism. And it's also true that so many people on your side of politics just won't let someone like Sadiq Khan win. Because if we were to flip the record, you'd go on calling him woke and too left-wing and too liberal, and then the next moment you go, oh, he's in the tow of Islamic extremists who want to kill gay people. You can't make it both ways. It boils down to a level of racism.
So how many MPs have been killed by the far right?
One.
And how many MPs have been killed by Islamists?
One each.
By Islamists. How many MPs have been seriously wounded by Islamists?
Joe Cox was killed by a far-right extremist.
Yeah. So,
and then,
but the threat level
and then there was
to
an
members
MP
of Parliament,
by a Muslim
it's not skinheads on the streets who are calling for intifada and jihad, is it? But it's actually Islamists who are calling for that.
All of those things are unacceptable. But what you're trying to do, and what Lee Anderson did, in my opinion, and the reason it's racist, is because it's projecting what that extreme part of Islam, that those people that have that version of Muslims that we find unacceptable, and then saying that because the Mayor of London is a Muslim, he must agree with them.
It's not saying that at all. It's not saying that at all. Has Sadiq Khan been as robust on his support of these campaigns? And I say that not implicit support, but support of telling the police not to allow projections against Elizabeth Tower or Big Ben that are genocidal chants against the Jews. Has he been robust enough, in your opinion, as a massive Labour supporter, in actually supporting the Jews in London?
Yeah, I think a lot of...
That is complete and utter nonsense, and you know it is, for a fact.
And he's met extensively with the Jewish community, and many of them have said about how they've been glad that he stood up for
how utterly supine.
But the truth is that you could say that you don't think he's done enough for the Jewish community, and that's fine, because that's a reasonable opinion. But what you're trying to do is associate extremism with him because he is a supporter,
I'm trying to say,
a believer in Islam.
I'm trying to say he has not been even-handed.
Racist.
He supports one side over the other. No. And I think that is what's been responsible
You're only
for
saying that
the police not applying the same, well, essentially the law to both sides. The police actually clamp down on those calling Hamas a terrorist organisation more than they do those calling for jihad and intifada.
Can I just say, so Benjamin, do you genuinely think that Darren's only saying what he's saying because is Islamophobe, is what you've basically just implied? Because he's a Muslim, you know, that is why Darren's having a go at Sadiq Khan.
The way that people speak about Sadiq Khan and speak about Muslims in this country, if it were flipped to speaking about Jewish people in the same way, we would instantly recognise the racism. And I think there is a real level of Islamophobia in this country. And Sadiq Khan is the most mistreated politician in Britain, and it's because there is a hatred to him because he looks different. There is nothing extreme about Sadiq Khan.
Do you know, Suella Braverman has had to keep her Home Office security detail out of office because of the threats that she receives to her life. And on that point about me being racist or Islamophobic, on that point, I would say, where was your condemnation, your moral indignation for the Batley Grammar School teacher when his life was totally ruined? He lost his job, he lost his career. People like you turned a blind eye to that. That, in my opinion, is complete and utter racism. No. Where were you then?
Well, I condemned it the whole way through, so you're quite mistaken.
Well, I don't remember reading that in your column, one of your columns. You didn't feel that sort of angry and impassioned.
But what you're doing is proving my point, because there is a problem in Britain with an extreme version of Islam that is trying to be dictatorial in examples like Batley and Spen, where they went after the lesbian Labour candidate in a horrendous way because of her sexuality, something that very few people knew before they went after her for it. And that is unacceptable. And Labour was able to beat those people, which I was very relieved about. But what you're doing is trying to conflate these extremist views with a moderate mainstream politician that's been elected twice who is a Muslim. And that is problematic, because not only do I believe that is a level of racism, but I also believe that empowers the extremists to tell them that they have got the control of the Mayor of London.
I haven't once said that Sadiq Khan is tantamount to some of the worst vestiges of Islamism in this country. I have suggested he hasn't been even-handed and he hasn't clamped down on those who actually call for the genocide of the Jews and for jihad and intifada.
Unfortunately, gentlemen, I could listen to you both all day. I think it's such an important debate to have. GB Views at GB News, what do you think? Which side do you agree with? Very interesting debate. Now, a Conservative source from GCHQ says that Lee Anderson was simply making the point that the Mayor, in his capacity as PCC for London, has abjectly failed to get a grip on the appalling examples of extremism we have seen in London recently. OK, fierce debate. You're watching and listening to GB News Saturday with me, Dawn Neeson, and there's loads more coming up on today's show. The government pledges £250 million to help the war effort in Ukraine, as today marks the second horrific anniversary of Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine. All of that and much more to come. You're watching GB News, Britain's news channel.
"2024, a battleground year."
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall? Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
Martin Daubney, weekdays from 3 p.m.
Welcome to the show. Superb stuff, great footage. So you're right in the thick of it there. What's the mood on the ground?
Well, I've left there now. I've actually now come to that EU Council summit that I was talking about. It's still pretty chaotic. The entire city of Brussels has been completely clogged with these tractors, sort of 3 abreast in most of the roads across the city. The people of Brussels aren't particularly happy. I mean, this is sort of reminiscent for some people of the Just Stop Oil protests, you know, people gluing themselves. People are unable to get to hospital appointments, and there's a lot of upset about the destruction that's happening on the streets of Brussels today. But on the other side, there's also the protests, which the farmers are saying that EU green laws simply are not able to fit with what they need to do to keep their businesses going. And just before the protests happened, we saw the European Commission actually make some concessions to the farmers' protests. And this is on the demands that were put on them to set aside somewhere in the region of 5% of their land for regrowing for biodiversity. A lot of the farmers have said that's not possible, and the European Commission has said that they can delay that coming in. So they have won a small concession with these protests.
And Jack, there's a feeling as well, a huge dissatisfaction that the European Union has managed to find 50 billion euros in aid to send to Ukraine, and yet farmers in particular are on the receiving end of net zero targets, taxation on diesel, and endless red tape. So many farmers, Jack, saying they're measuring ditches to see if they have to drain them or not. There are minimum requirements on the width of battery hen enclosures. Endless red tape, as Jeremy Clarkson pointed out in Clarkson's farm in Britain. They've simply had enough, and they're shouting, Ursula von der Leyen, we are here.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello and welcome back to GB News Saturday with me, Dawn Neeson, on your TV, online and on digital radio. Now, the government pledges $250 million to help the war effort in Ukraine, as today marks, incredibly, it marks the second anniversary of Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine, which prompted thousands of men and women to enlist to defend their country. In that time, the UK has offered its support, providing not just billions of pounds, but billions of pounds worth of weaponry, but also vital military training. Joining me now is former senior military intelligence officer Philip Ingram, MBE. Philip, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. I can't believe it's 2 years. On one hand, I was looking at some of the horrific pictures over the past 2 years. It seems a long time, but on the other hand, it seems to have flown past. I mean, what do you make of the situation now? Is Russia winning? Is this ever going to end?
Yeah, well, day 730 of Vladimir Putin's 10-day special military operation. And if we measure the movement of the front line, I can see why people are saying Ukraine is not winning. But by the same example, Russia is not winning. If we look what's happened over the last 2 years, Ukraine has stopped Russia from achieving its strategic objectives, i.e.
throwing Zelensky out of the country and putting a puppet regime in place. Russia has failed to stop NATO expanding. They said they invaded or re-invaded Ukraine because they feared that Ukraine would join NATO. We've now got Finland joining NATO and Sweden coming up to it. From a wider perspective, the Ukrainians have sunk about a third of the Russian Black Sea Fleet, and Ukraine doesn't have a navy. Russia has been unable to create what's called air superiority and fly its air force across Ukrainian territory, and it's been fixed on this front line that hasn't moved very much, and it hasn't moved much because Ukraine is lacking the ammunition and the weapon systems that it needs to properly prosecute an offensive operation. So I think, on balance, Ukraine has done a huge amount and is pushing Russia back very slowly. It's currently hollowing it out from behind with special operations, executive type operations, and Russia can't gain the initiative. But Ukraine doesn't have the wherewithal yet to properly push Russia out of the territory it occupies.
Grant Shapps has said that Britain will invest $250 million in producing artillery shells for the Ukrainian army, and we are indeed training troops up in this country as we speak. What do we do if this doesn't happen? And what does Ukraine do if we don't carry on with this funding? And do you sense there's a bit of Ukraine fatigue amongst the UK population who are already suffering in a cost of living crisis?
Well, I think it's Ukraine fatigue across the world. That's what Vladimir Putin is hoping for. Putting this into context, what we're doing at the moment in stopping Vladimir Putin, and the Ukrainians are fighting our battle for us. If the Ukrainians lose, or there's a stalemate, the amount it's going to cost us is going to be 10, 50, 100 times what it's costing us at the moment. That £250 million that's going to be invested into shells for Ukraine, that £250 million is being spent in the UK. It's increasing UK's manufacturing capability. That means that the factories that are producing the shells need more UK steel, they need more UK explosives, they need more UK personnel to come and work in the factories, which will mean that the small industries, the shops that are around there will get more income coming in. There'll be more tax going back into the exchequer. This is a good thing for us from an economy perspective. We then send those shells across to Ukraine, and Ukraine is defending the rest of Europe and the rest of the world against Russian expansionism, and it's doing it in a very, very cost-effective way compared to what we would have to pay if Vladimir Putin decided to invade into Europe.
Philip, 2 years today, how much longer can this go on?
That's it's not the $6 million question, it's probably the $6 trillion question. The Russian defences along the front line are more comprehensive than anything we've seen in any conflict ever, even during the Second World War. That is going to be very difficult for Ukraine to punch through. Ukraine needs more armoured capability. It needs a better Air Force capability, and that's coming in with the F-16s. It needs longer-range missile capability, and it needs more manpower on the ground. Russia is just about holding on, but it's relying on sending thousands of its troops to death on a daily basis. It's relying on ammunition coming in from Iran and from North Korea. That shows the desperate state that Russia is in. I think we will probably be, in another 730 days, still asking how long the conflict in Ukraine is going to go on.
Oh, not good news. Thank you very much. That's our former senior military intelligence officer, Philip Ingram, MBE. Thank you, Philip, for joining us this afternoon, even though it's not doesn't sound like the greatest news in the world, does it? Right, you're with me, Dawn Neeson, on GB News Saturday. Loads more coming up on today's show. But first, here's those news headlines with Theo Chikomba.
It's 32 minutes past 2. I'm Theo Chikomba in the GB newsroom. The London mayor has accused the Prime Minister of condoning racism following a senior Tory MP's comment on protests in the capital. Lee Anderson's under fire for saying Sadiq Khan had given the capital away to Islamists following months of demonstrations. Labour is calling for the whip to be removed from the former deputy chair. The London mayor says it's important to call out anti-Muslim hatred, just like any other form of hatred.
Look, these comments from a senior Conservative are Islamophobic, are anti-Muslim and are racist. We've seen over the last 2 days confirmation that over the last few months there's been an increase in anti-Muslim cases by more than 330%. These comments pour fuel on the fire of anti-Muslim hatred. And I'm afraid the deafening silence from Rishi Sunak and from the cabinet is them condoning this racism.
The UK has reaffirmed its commitment to Ukraine, promising £245 million to produce artillery shells as the country's war with Russia enters its third year. The Defence Secretary Grant Shapps says he's proud that since the invasion, the UK has trained 60,000 Ukrainian troops, adding that no one has done as much for Kyiv than the UK. Junior doctors in England have walked out for the 10th time since March last year over pay dispute. The British Medical Association has asked for a 35% pay rise, which the government has described as unreasonable. More than 1.3 million appointments and operations have already been cancelled or rescheduled since industrial action began. For the latest stories, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts. Now it's back to GB News Saturday.
Thank you very much, Theo. Now, remember, you can get in touch about all the stories we've been discussing today or anything you want to talk about, basically. We're here for you. Just email me on gbviews@gbnews.com or message me on our socials @gbnews. Really simple. Loads more coming up on today's show. Right, the typical annual energy bill will fall, this is good news, folks, to £1,690 from April, to the lowest for 2 years under new price cap set by the regulator Ofgem. But what does it really mean for the pennies in your pocket? And do you understand it? All that and much more, including chocolate. We have chocolate. Don't go anywhere. I'm Dawn Neeson. You're with GB News, Britain's news channel. Get the kettle on. Chocolate coming up.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Britain's newsroom, weekday mornings from 9:30.
The EU rules are trying to choke even that. And I just think, I would join this protest in a heartbeat. And you are right to point out this stuff about them being right-wing. How dare they slate them as right-wing when these are real people whose livelihoods
and
are
remember,
being
a lot of people who work in the farm industry, Malone, get paid very little money.
They get paid.
Agricultural workers are very badly paid.
They get paid nothing, Pierce. And, the profits... I think on Clark's Farm I read somewhere that I saw that when you sell it like a sheep's skin, it's 30 pence or something. Right. And you say, what?
Yeah.
And so you wonder how they can manage that. And I think after a year, Clarkson made a handful of pounds.
He made like 90 quid profit or something.
In a whole year working.
But Carol makes a really good point, though, doesn't she, Nikki, about this idea that we go to the supermarkets, we shop there, we eat our food, we don't often give it a thing. And the farmers have become so frustrated by this idea that they are not respected.
Absolutely. I mean, they're running what are effectively small businesses, often family businesses that have been passed down through generations. They also tend to know the land and the animals better than anyone else in those areas. I am all for green protests, I'm all for climate change activism, but actually... the only way you can do that is gradually. It's exactly what we've seen with Port Talbot. You can't just go in and say, you're not going to do it anymore this way. You've got to do it this way instead. The Tata Steel thing. Yes, exactly. You've got to do it this way instead. Lots of farmers are on board with protecting the planet, but they can't do it overnight. You've got to give them time. So they're protesting, they're saying no farmers, no food.
When you say you support some of these
obvious.
environmental protests, you're not one of these closet supporters of Just Stop Oil, are you?
I'm not a closet supporter. I think I've been quite open about Just Stop Oil.
No.
I don't like all their methods, but I do like the message. But I do appreciate the message. But sometimes you've got to do difficult things.
What they're asking for now, those protesters, are unrealistic. What these protesters are asking for is not unrealistic.
No.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall?
Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall?
Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
Oh, right. I could tell you what I've just been talking about, then I would probably have to kill you or myself or probably my next guest. Welcome back to GB News Saturday with me, Dawn Neeson, on your TV, online and on digital radio. Now, good news, folks, I think. The typical annual energy bill will fall to £1,690 from April to the lowest for 2 years, yay, under the new price cap set by the regulator. It means a drop of around £238 a year or around £20 a month for a household using a typical amount of energy. Joining me now is former advisor of the Bank of England, Roger Gewolb, to explain this. And Roger, you need to make this crisp and sexy and full of impact, because we're coming to the end of the show. I have chocolate lined up. Yeah, I know, you're more than welcome. So, energy bills, talk to me.
Yeah, well, I think there are three impactful, sexy points here. First of all, don't get excited because...
That's not helping. That's not a good start.
$238 a year, but remember what most people don't know. The energy cap is only for 3 months. It's quarter to quarter. Mm-hmm. So it's 20 quid a month, but in 3 months' time, it's predicted to rise. Then in the next quarter, it's going to fall. So you never quite know where it's going to be. But I think in all of these, if I may say, small beer stories about 20 quid here and 5 quid there, I mean, there are two really important issues about energy. This is a very tolerant country. We put up with other people's views, let the other guys, I mean, that's why I live here. I love it. The flip side of that coin is we get taken advantage of, rip off Britain. And one of the biggest parts of rip off Britain is how much we pay for energy, Dawn. Now, 2/3 of the average home energy bill is electricity. And our electricity is priced off the international market price of gas. But our electricity doesn't come from gas. If you go to the national grid, if you Google national grid, they have a live clock, a real-time clock, which shows you at any second where our electricity is coming from. Yeah, it's available to anyone.
Okay.
It's free, just Google it. It'll show you most days 20%, 30%, 40% of our electricity comes from gas. The rest comes from wind, solar, nuclear, other renewables, etc. And yet we are paying many times more what that electricity costs because we're pegged to the price of gas. Because back in the 80s, when the energy companies were nationalized, they put that convention in place, and for some mysterious reason, no government has ever reversed it. Boris said reverse it. Ofgem, the regulator, said reverse it. John Penrose, the MP who invented the price cap, and by the way says it's no longer fit for purpose, said reverse it, and they just won't reverse it. I don't know why. But a number of think tanks said that if they did reverse it, and it's not like interest rates where you lower an interest, it takes a while. This is that afternoon, strike of the pen. That when the total bill for an average home was $3,000 rather than $1,690 as it is now. If Sunak had taken a pen and done that at lunchtime, that afternoon, the average home bill would have been 1,500 quid. And they still don't do it. So we are being massively ripped off. We have paid, says one think tank, £7.2 billion in the last 24 months in unnecessary excess electricity charges to the companies.
So it's not good news. So who's making all the money? Just quickly, running out of time.
The energy companies. The second point, very quickly, Google my name, my surname, Giewolb, and the words direct debit, and you'll see a video, there's no time for it here, that I made some time ago about the direct debit. Many of these energy companies, as you know, build up cash balances from our monthly payments. And when the prices go up, they even write to us and say, we're raising your direct debit amount, even though
they've got some money.
they're our bank with no interest. You can, under the direct debit indemnity, call your bank up and say, give me that money back, even if they don't like it. Look at my video, Giewolb, G-E-W-O-L-B, direct debit.
OK, great. Thank you very much, Roger. You did make it crisp and sexy and full of impact, and I learned a lot there. Basically, I'm being ripped off. That is Roger Giewolb there, former advisor to the Bank of England. Thank you very much for joining me on a Saturday afternoon, Roger.
Thank you.
Right, OK. Don't go anywhere, there's chocolate. You're with me, Dawn Neeson, on GB News Saturday. Lots more coming up on today's show. It is nearly Easter, and the Good Housekeeping Institute, a blind tested, has revealed the best chocolate egg in the UK. Drum roll, please. Join us to find out exactly which one it was. All of that and much more coming up with GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
The Camilla Tominey Show, Sunday mornings from 9:30.
I appreciate the story isn't in today's papers, but it has been running all week, and it's this row over the use of nitrogen hypoxia to kill this man who was on death row in Alabama.
Yeah.
And it's been linked back to you, and I wanted to ask you about it because this is intriguing, because you did a television show back in 2015 where you, I believe, tested this method of execution. Just tell me briefly about it, Michael. What happened?
I didn't test this method of execution, and it was a bit longer ago than that. But what I did do was test hypoxia. So I tested various ways in which people are killed in the United States, and asked the question as to whether there was a more humane way of doing it. So I was put into hypoxic situations, for example, into a chamber run by the Netherlands Air Force, which simulated what happens if you're in an aircraft at 30,000 feet and suddenly the windows blow out. And what happened to me was that I was almost instantly rendered incapable. As an experiment, I was trying to play with children's toys, putting triangle shapes into triangle spaces, and I was quickly unable to do that. I was asked, what is 9 minus 5? And I said 5. And then the officer who was with me, the Air Force officer who was wearing an oxygen mask, said to me, Michael, put your mask on or you will die. And I was incapable of putting my own mask on. Now, this suggested that hypoxia was very fast acting, and that you had... Obviously, I was in no pain or anything like that. I was just completely unaware. By the way, this is why, if you're on an aircraft and it depressurizes, you must put your own mask on first. But of course, I can't go on and draw conclusions. We did not experiment with nitrogen. But what I can say is it was evident to me that hypoxia renders you incapable almost instantaneously.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, every Sunday at 9:30 when I'll be interviewing the key players in British politics and taking them to task. This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. With an upcoming election looming over Westminster, now is the time for clear, honest answers. I agree. And that's precisely what I'll get. Is he indecisive? Incompetent? That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's election channel.
Welcome back to GB News Saturday with me, Dawn Neeson, on your TV, online and on digital radio. Loads of you have been getting in touch, sending in your thoughts. I'm going to put my glasses on again because I look more intelligent. Actually, I don't. I just can't read without them. Right, on energy bills, big one this, isn't it? You just heard what Roger had to say just before the break. Mark, good afternoon, Mark, says, of course I welcome any reduction, but this is too little too late and will not be enough of a reduction to stimulate growth in the economy. Ofgem has, in fact, that's a regulator, has fouled along with the government. These high costs are the reason for the current recession in the UK. They have crippled businesses and domestic consumers. Meanwhile, Harold says, I think Harold's slightly tongue-in-cheek with this one. Harold said, great, the price is coming down, but what we haven't been told is the standing charge is going up. I understand. Harold, I think we do all understand, don't we, as lovely Roger was saying before the break. We're kind of being ripped off. It's like a little bit of good news here. Be good boys and girls. Here's the good news. But also, we're also being ripped off and paying more than we should have been paying. But thank you all for getting in touch this afternoon. I love reading your emails. gbviews@gbnews. Please, talk to me. Right, now, it's nearly Easter. Well, it's been nearly Easter since Christmas, hasn't it? That's when eggs went in the shop. And the Good Housekeeping Institute are blind tested over 160 products from a selection of UK brands to find the best products for you this Easter. And this year's Cadbury's £12 Crunchy Inclusions Ultimate Easter Egg has taken top spot. Ta-da! Sadly, it's so popular, it's kind of sold out, so we couldn't get one to test for you in the studio. Someone's being sacked for this. But joining me now is consumer goods expert and nutritionist Monica Price. Monica, thank you so much for joining me this afternoon to talk about Easter and, more specifically, chocolate, because that's what it's about. So, now, Monica, we've had chocolate Easter eggs in the shops since Christmas?
I think so, yes. And I agree with you. I tried to get one of these Cadbury's crunchy eggs, and no, I couldn't find one anywhere. So I don't know where they've gone to, but people are clearly loving them already.
They are indeed. So this did, Good Housekeeping have done this test, sort of like, everything for Easter that you could possibly want, from sort of like, hot cross buns to the chocolate, etc., etc. How does it fare? Does it sound like there are some good deals out there for people?
Yeah, do you know, it does actually. And what was interesting is that, Good Housekeeping are really good. They've gone, from Waitrose to Asda to Aldi, and there's a good mix of all sorts of things. As you say, there's beef, there's lamb, the hot cross bun. Waitrose came out on top for the hot cross bun this year. But the Easter eggs in particular, two of the top ones were both from Asda. I think the dark chocolate one was Asda, and also the Asda one with raspberry marshmallow. That sounds very yummy. That's also have come up on top as well. So it's good to see that they've got a really broad section, because, people are struggling and not everyone can afford to go to Waitrose and Marks and Spencer's. Interesting, nothing from Marks and Spencer's on this list, Dawn.
Right, OK. A seamless link. It's almost like we've rehearsed this, Monica, which we haven't, by the way. We're not that clever. Well, Monica is, I'm not. Because in front of me, it's potentially one of the scariest Easter eggs I've ever seen. Evidently, it is. There you go. It is Dougal. Is that the right camera angle for people? Can you see that there? Yeah, look at that. Now, that is an offering from Marks and Spencer's. It is Dougal. It's a chocolate dog. I don't know what kind of dog it is. Someone probably will tell me. The one thing I'm struggling with, Monica, on this is, I'm going to bite his head off in a minute, don't worry, is Easter eggs are not really eggs anymore. I mean, we have dogs. We had, a couple of years ago, there was an Easter chocolate aubergine, which was really embarrassing to eat if you were a female. I have to say, it was a vegan offering. Is Easter over-commercialised? I mean, a chocolate dog, what's that about?
Yeah, and I mean, I think one on the top list was a Waitrose egg on toast. Don't know if you saw that. That's come out as the children's top favourite. Whereas I used to just love the traditional egg, just a normal egg, a chocolate egg. Cadbury's chocolate buttons was always my favourite, rather than, these different shapes. Maybe, Dawn, they're just trying to capture the, the imagination of children in particular early on. And, what I don't agree with is that we've got them in our shops now so much earlier than we ever used to. I mean, it was literally, just as you said, as soon as Christmas comes to an end, the shelves are becoming full of Easter eggs, and I just think that's just crazy. You know, we don't have time to celebrate anymore, and don't forget it's a big religious celebration as well. So it just seems to be everything now just seems to be over commercialised, which I think is a great shame.
How important is Easter at the moment for the industry, for shops? I mean, as I said, we've had this stuff on sale since December now, but is it an important time of year? Is it more important than Christmas almost?
Well, I mean, if you're a Christian, for example, it's a very important time of the year because obviously it's the resurrection of Jesus. But if you're not religious, I think it's funny enough. I was having this debate with a friend of mine, Don. We were just talking about, do people even celebrate Easter anymore? Has it just become a commercial game where us as consumers we're just bowled over with all sorts of eggs, different shapes, different sizes, hot cross buns, massive joints of meat that we're never going to really eat, but we're just sold this kind of perception of Easter, and I think as consumers we are very much engaged with that, and I think for the younger generation they probably don't realise the importance of it. If you're religious, for example, or they just think, oh great, it's just time to have an Easter egg. And I think it's like any holiday now. I think we've become quite Americanized, really, where we just overdo everything, and I think that's where I think we could do so much better, because I think people will be spending a lot of money on things that they might not necessarily need to buy at all.
Monica, thank you so much for joining me and talking all things Easter, which is still, I think, a month away still, but, it feels like it's been with us forever. Thank you, Monica Price, on that one. You've been with me, Dawn Neeson, on GB News Saturday. Thank you so much for joining me, but don't go anywhere, though, because the wonderful Nana Queer is up next. So thank you for watching. Don't go anywhere. Nana's up next. I'm leaving here with this little fellow because he might frighten me, but I'm going to bite his head off. So let's look. While I'm doing this, you have a look at the weather, though, because that's important, isn't it? Right, bye. Have a lovely weekend, everybody. Thanks very much for watching. Bye.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Greg Dewhurst and welcome to your latest GB News weather. We've got showers around, but they're slowly fading away. We'll see some mist and fog patches before further wet and windy weather spreads in for Sunday and into Monday, and that's courtesy of this area of low pressure. Met Office warnings for the heavy rain falling on already saturated ground. We could see some flooding issues over the next few days. Showers fading away this evening time, lots of clear skies developing. That will allow temperatures to fall away, close to if not below freezing overnight, so some frost in places, some icy stretches from recent showers, and also some mist and fog patches. Some wet and windy weather starting to move into parts of Cornwall by the end of the night. Here, temperatures rising elsewhere, a cold start to Sunday. Mist and fog patches slow to clear, but then plenty of sunny spells developing, particularly across northern parts of the UK. Parts of southern Wales into southwest England, a wet and windy day to come. Met Office warnings out through the day, and this rain slowly pushes its way eastwards as we move through Sunday across southern counties of England. Elsewhere, generally dry with sunny spells. Temperatures near average for most, just some mild air starting to creep into the far southwest. A wet start across the southeast and windy too on Monday morning. This slowly pulls away, and then we've got a mixture of sunny spells and scattered showers across the country.